Good evening and welcome to the study session. The study session is regarding a proposed ordinance to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco within the city of Albany. As part of the study session, council will receive a presentation from two well-known and respected experts in this field. I'm going to introduce both of them and they will come up and do their presentation. We have Bonnie Halpern-Felcher, Professor of Pediatrics and Health Research and Policy, and co-principal investigator for the FDA and NIH-funded Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science, Stanford University. We're also pleased to have with us tonight Dr. Philip Gardner, Senior Program Officer, Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program, University of California Office of the President, and co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Thank you both for being with us this evening. And please come up and begin your presentation. Did you get some?
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to present today. Very important and very excited to be here to talk about this very important issue going on right now, and I do apologize. I am not successfully fighting a cold. Oh, hello.
Where's my nasal spray?
Okay, there we go. So as you may know, there's been a tremendous change in the landscape of tobacco products in the last 10, 15 years. Of particular, you may know, in addition to your traditional cigarettes that are up there on the far left, we also have hookah, which is the middle with the hose, and more recently, electronic cigarettes, and particularly important to note are the more pod-based products, which are the Juuls, the top right, and the bottom, which are the Sorn and the Fix products. These are the latest tobacco and nicotine products that people are using. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details about the products themselves. I'm going to keep this focused on flavors, but I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions about that. What's important to know is that all of these products have flavors, flavorings, flavorants in them. All these products that I've shown you, and particularly the newer products that are on the market. So I want to back up just for a second and talk about the 2009 Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. So this act from the federal government gave the FDA authority to regulate particularly tobacco products, but particularly cigarettes. But what's important to note on the left are the regulations that were approved. But what's important are on the right is that there were no regulations around the flavors of tobacco products. And that's where we're at today, is that despite some regulations that are there, we do not have the flavors on tobacco products overall. And there were some that came later in time, not on mint and menthol, and then nothing that's been brought forth for prevention of other flavors in the more popular and more recent tobacco products like Juuls and vapes. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the flavors of vapes so you're aware of it. Here are all of the flavors, not all, here are some of the flavors of vapes that are out there on the market right now. And I show you this, admit a little bit of shock and awe, but also to say, when you're talking about these flavors, and a lot of people, we'll talk about this in a minute, say, oh, it's no big deal because these are for adults. I don't know about you, but not many adults want to use Jam Monster or Cherry Crush, and all these flavors are on there, as well as some others that I won't talk about in a chamber of esteem such as this. So that's important. Right now, there are 15,000 flavors on the market And these are things like what you see there, Barney Pebbles and Dragon's Blood and other flavors that are just attracting our young people right now. And that's really important to know. And when you ask a young person, what flavor are you using? Is it sweet? Is it salty? Is it cherry? They don't know. This is what they're calling them, these really cool new flavors and names that are on the market. So let's talk a little bit about the flavors and why it's important. So particularly youth report that flavors are the main reason why they are trying these products. It's absolutely the main reason. And they tell us in research, numbers of studies, that if there was not any flavor in these products, they would not use them. And in fact, I didn't bring in the ads, but there are actually ads and websites that tell youth, particularly girls, don't eat your dessert, vape it. And that's a really scary message to tell young people. So flavors are extremely popular and extremely appealing to young people. They're also more attracted to these flavors than are adults. And by having the flavors in there and the flavorants, it actually makes the tobacco products easier for them to use. It makes it taste better and it makes it easier for them to digest. So a little bit of data that we have, and I'm going to go back and forth between some policy and some data. Just some qualitative interviews we did with adolescents who were about 14 years of age, and one young person who was a user said, "Oh, I use that all day," meaning a vape. "I just keep it with me in my pocket, and when I felt like having a taste of something flavory, I just take a hit. When you smell like blue raspberry and green apple, no one is going to question why you smell like that." And that's the other problem, is that these vapes and these various tobacco products with flavors don't smell like tobacco used to smell. And so it's very easy for them to get away with these products. We also had another young person who said, "I liked apple and I like more fruity flavors, vanilla, mocha, and those things." And that's why these young people are using them. We also did a study that we published in October in JAMA Online, where we actually asked adolescents what flavors they were using. There's a whole lot of other things in this study, but I'm going to hone in on the flavors piece. And what we saw, if you look on the left, is that only one of the teens in our study used tobacco, Juuls, and only one used a tobacco-flavored vape. Only one. Everybody else was using some other flavor. And what's also important to note is that while you're grappling with, and the FDA is grappling with, whether or not to regulate mint, and I know Phil Gardner's going to talk about that more, mint and menthol, we have almost 27% of the participants in our study, granted the numbers are small, but the percentages saying that they use mint, and about 12% saying that they use mint, other types of tobacco products and vapes. And they are using the fruits and the desserts as well. So this is very important to realize that these are the flavors that our young people are using. So then there's the question of whether the ads for these flavors are attracting youth. And I know that you can't necessarily regulate an ad for flavors in a particular community or city, but this shows you again the power of those flavors in appealing to young people. So the tobacco industry is saying, oh, the flavors are in there for adults. They're in there for adults to use these products and for adults to quit, and they're not attracting youth. So we asked youth in our study, are these flavors attracting you, these ads attracting you, or do you think they're for somebody older or somebody your age or somebody younger? So we showed them a number of different ads. And these are all real ads. So you've got the top left, you've got the cupcake, very fancy cupcake, you've got caramel mocha, you've got beer, and you've got a smoothie. And we asked them, so would this product be appealing, like I said, to you, somebody older or somebody younger? And if you look here, and if you look mostly at the purple, very few of the participants in our study said that these flavors, all of the flavors, were attracting people older than them, older adults. Overwhelmingly, they said it was either themselves, their age, or somebody younger. And when you get something like the Cupcake Man, that very fruity, fun-looking cupcake, overwhelmingly the people in our study said somebody younger than them. So for the industry to keep saying these flavors are not attracting youth is absolutely ridiculous. So we found that the participant felt that the ads were for them. They particularly thought the sweet flavors. But what's also important is even the coffee and the alcohol ads, while we may see those as adult flavors, were attractive to young people. Young people want to be adults. They want to look like adults. They want to sound like adults, and they want to eat and drink things that adults drink. So when we say to them, that's something for adults, youth don't say, okay, I won't use it. You say, great, let me try it. So that's the problem here. The other thing that's important, and I only go into this very briefly, but are the pulmonary effects. So in all of these vaping products are diacetyl, propylene glycol, glycerin, other products that make the big plume that you may see when young people or anybody uses these products. And that's from the e-juice. When people inhale this, they're not just inhaling nicotine, which has its own set of problems, but and flavors. They're inhaling all these other contaminants that are in there. So flavorings are very much attributed to respiratory illness, bronchitis, bronchiolitis, and other life-threatening respiratory failure. The other thing is there's something, the diacetyl, that's a buttery flavor. You may have heard of something called popcorn lung. When popcorn first came out, the microwavable popcorn, people who were working in the factories were getting lesions in their lungs that were very hard to detect and very hard to treat. It was from the diacetyl, the buttery flavors that were being heated. There's something at the federal level called GROS, generally recognized as safe for eating. That does not mean that we can heat these at very high flavors and then inhale them. When you do that, that's when you're having the pulmonary effects. And we're seeing these not just in humans, in animal models, but in humans as well. So then the question often is, and I hear this all the time when I talk about this problem, is, well, what about the adults? Don't adults need flavors to help them quit, and don't adults need these e-cigarettes or vapes to help them quit smoking cigarettes? There's absolutely no data to support that. In fact, the data show that adults who use flavors are less likely to quit and less likely to quit cigarettes, and actually more likely to use both cigarettes and an electronic cigarette. So there's no evidence that we need to keep flavors on the market to help adults quit cigarettes. So in sum, what are the data showing? The data are showing that youth are clearly using these flavors, and they likely would not have used these products if they did not have flavors in them. Things like juicy fruit and mango jewels and Bubblicious are not attractive to adults. Those are kid flavors. And that there's little evidence the adults need to use these flavors to quit. So what I recommend and strongly feel that you as a city should eliminate all flavored tobacco products, eliminate the ads, or which you can't necessarily do the ads, but at least the talking about the ads as being important for adults, not believing that e-cigarettes help adults, and not believing that the flavors help adults. By perpetuating those two pieces, that we're also perpetuating to young people and to anybody that these flavors are important. One last thing I want to say that I didn't do a slide on, but as you may be aware, the FDA is also talking about another flavors ban, but not including mint and menthol. And I would suggest that Albany and other localities don't wait for the federal government to do this. We know that that's going to take a long time. We've already been hearing about it being held up in court. We're not sure it's going to be all flavors. We're not sure it's going to be everywhere. So that's why I really urge Albany and other cities to take the action themselves, as we've seen other cities and states doing, because that's very important. And with that, I'll end, and my email's there if I can provide any further data. Thank you.
Okay, before you leave, Council, do you have any questions for her?
Please.
I have seen in some adults who are pretty thin, I've noticed like in friends who are in their 40s, the ones who are smoking still are thinner. So is part of the appeal of nicotine for young kids, and I imagine young women especially, is that it helps them keep weight off?
Nicotine and flavors, yes. That is definitely part of the appeal, but there's actually not really how it works. It's more that it does suppress appetite, but also when young people or any adult stop using the product, they also put weight on. So that's the problem. But absolutely, adolescents, and particularly adolescent girls, are using these as a suppressant for food, and like I was saying before, as a replacement for flavors. Absolutely. I will say we don't have a lot of great data on the newer products out there, but we do know from looking at qualitative data, talking to youth, and looking at the ads for these products that that's the message that they're getting. Also,
Are we seeing in the epidemiological literature an increase in lung illnesses in teenagers and children from vaping?
we're seeing an increase in pneumonia. And the problem is we don't necessarily have it, as you're asking, at the epidemiological level. We don't have big population level data yet. It's still too new. These products have been on the market since 2007, Juuls since 2015, which is the big epidemic that we're seeing right now. So we're seeing a lot of case reports of pneumonia, and we are seeing the pulmonary effects that I mentioned. Short of that, we don't see a lot yet, but there's some early evidence that epidemiological increase will certainly be there if we stay on the path that we're on right now.
Okay, one thing you didn't mention that was covered in a recent New York Times article was that in addition to the flavors being attractive to the kids, they just get addicted to nicotine,
Absolutely.
Period. So what health consequences are there for nicotine addiction, period? And at some point, I imagine they become so addicted it wouldn't matter if they had flavors or not. They'd just need nicotine. They'd
That is
smoke
absolutely
cigarettes.
true.
They would do patches, anything they could get their hands on.
Absolutely. We used to say with cigarettes that they use it for the nicotine and die from the tar and the chemicals. And basically with youth, they're using it for the nicotine, but they're using it for the flavors, and they're staying with it because of the nicotine, and who knows what's going to happen to them afterwards. That's absolutely true. And actually, I've been doing a lot of work on the nicotine side, and actually, which I didn't bring in because of the focus on flavors, but absolutely know about this. The paper that I showed you, the JAMA paper that we published, particularly around Juuls, we saw that about 15 to 16% of the youth in our study were using them on a regular basis. Those who were using them more often than other products, and that they, on a very objective scale of addiction, they were showing signs of addiction already after just using them for a short period of time. So we're definitely seeing not only an epidemic in use of these flavored products, and I say flavored because they are flavored, the products that youth are using now, and adults, but also that we're seeing higher levels of nicotine dependence in these young people. Very important to note, and I don't mean to make this about Juuls, but that's the product that a lot of young people are using right now, that Juuls have 59 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine. So my chemistry lesson is that a Juul pod, which is the part with the e-liquid goes into it, it's 0.7 milliliters. So it's basically about 41 milligrams of nicotine in a pod, which is 2 packs of cigarettes. That's a huge amount of nicotine that these young people are using. When I've talked to young people and people who talk to young people about how much they're using 1 to 2 Juul pods a day. That's 2 to 4 packs of cigarettes in a day. That's huge, and I don't mean this hyperbolically. That is what they're using right now, so it's an incredible amount. If you look at some of the other products they're using, there's also nicotine in there, albeit less. But absolutely, these youth are showing very significant signs of addiction.
And the last question is, what about the possibility, I'm not suggesting it's a good idea, but if they're after the flavors, and at least in the beginning are not after the nicotine, what about some sort of product that has the flavors but no nicotine at all?
A lot of people would think that that's a fine idea. I know the FDA cannot go to zero nicotine. I was on Institute of Medicine committee where we didn't recommend that, but we were told by law the FDA cannot go to zero. So according to the FDA law now, the regulation, they cannot go to zero nicotine. But if we went to low levels, probably people would try it for the flavors and then stop after a while. Absolutely. I still do worry, very much so, about some of the lung issues that we're seeing and about some of the other issues, because they're still using a product that's got all these different flavorants and chemicals in there. And also, we don't even know, there's some suggestion of the little particles that are in there as well, and the cotton and the plastic and the metal, that they're ingesting those. So I'm not saying that they're harmless, but probably young people would use it as a fad and stop. We don't know. Please.
This is an important question.
Could you come up to the microphone, please? Thank you.
This is an important question that you posed.
Thank you.
I don't know if I need the mic. But the question is, aldehydes are flavorings in electronic cigarettes, and what a number of the vaporists will tell you, well, we have people that come in here and buy just the flavors and inhale them. And just to emphasize what Bonnie has said, they're generally recognized as safe when you ingest them, but they're not recognized as safe if you inhale them. The toxicity spectrum in the lung is different than the toxicity spectrum in the trachea and the stomach and the liver and all of that. So I appreciate the thought about it, but it's still a problem. I mean, particularly with diacetyl, which we've mentioned. We also know of other specific flavors in terms of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's no. Thank you, Phil. There's the cinnamon aldehyde, which cinnamon is a problem. I think T-bone steak is one of the other ones that has, I mean, strange things, but has a lot of problems in there. The other thing I will mention is, because these products are not well regulated right now, even those that go down to zero, I've been tested to show that there's some amount of nicotine in there. And then there's also a company in, or a group doing some work in, I think it's Arizona, who've tested the Juuls, and they're seeing upwards of 77 milligrams of nicotine, not 59. So it is an arms race. It's an incredible race. And I didn't even show you the picture's not there anymore, of course, but the Soren and some of the other products do have 70 plus. We calculated that in our lab of about 3 packs of cigarettes a day. So we're not going down in the amount of nicotine that we're seeing in these products. We're going up.
Oh, I'm sorry, let me squeeze in one last question. And this kind of refers back to, remember the days of Joe Camel billboards. And one of the ways to fight that is just advertising this directed at students that says, Juuls are not cool after all. I mean, you have to fight fire with fire in some way. So is there any money for that? There's lots of state money for anti-smoking campaigns. Can we get any of that money for anti-vaping campaigns?
Yeah. So, sorry, I mentioned that talking.
Go ahead. I work for a funding agency, so I think your point is right on the money. Proposition 56 that passed a couple of years ago really bolstered the amount of money that is available to the state of California. Mike? Oh, because it's being recorded. Okay, so what do I need? Oh, I'm sorry. Mike! So yes, the California Tobacco Control Program actually has a number of radio ads and television ads about juuling, and they're out, and they're particularly why we don't see them. A lot of things are on social media, and I must admit I'm not, going to my Instagram account, which I don't have, and looking at things, but there's a lot of money being put into that. I work at the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. We got a lot of more money in that, and what we're trying to do is get people to focus on some of these issues, and people are actually doing studies around them. So the short answer is yes, there is money and effort being put into this, both at the prevention level and at the research level.
And I'll add, thanks to Phil and TRDRP, we have a sizable funding to do, and I actually talked to your superintendent about this. We have a free online tobacco prevention toolkit that we've created, and it's a curriculum or set of curriculums for schools and doctors and others to be using directly to talk to youth about it. And so we basically been disseminating that throughout California, throughout the country. And in there, we do a lot of counter marketing, and then I just had and a lot of education and teaching. We also have to educate parents and doctors. I gave a grand rounds at a community hospital in San Mateo where I live, and I asked how many of you know of vapes. Most people. How many of you know of Juuls, and ask about it? Nobody in the audience. So, and when you talk to parents, it's the same problem. So we go around and talk about it. So we do have funding to do a lot of this. And
I've given talks at San Francisco General Hospital, at UCSF, and at Highland Hospital to pediatricians. I do the similar presentation. People don't know about this. These are doctors. These are medical folks. So yeah, this is it's a burning issue. Yeah.
No, it really is.
Are there any other council questions? You got anything right now? Over here, okay. So let's switch speakers, and we'll hear you, and then,
I'm going to ask, I'm going to show you some flavored products and actually hand them around to you to get a sense of what we're dealing with here. First, let me thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Philip Gardner. I work at the University of California, Office of the President, have for the last 20 some odd years. And really, let me give you how I got into this. I was sitting at my desk in 1998 reading the Surgeon General's report. It was the first one done on ethnic and racial minorities and health disparities. And it seemed that page after page after page that African Americans were dying disproportionately of tobacco-related disease. And I had been working in breast cancer prior to that and hadn't really paid much attention to that. But when you dug down deeper, come to find out that one of the driving forces in that was the use of menthol products. Let me just say I want to applaud the City Council for bringing this up. I know the Juul explosion has got us all kind of focused on this, but the initial thing with menthol, I think it's important to understand that it is a social justice issue. And that it's not just about kids, even though I think it's very important that we talk about kids, but it's about adults too. So let me just do this kind of quickly. To give you a sense of the significance of the question that we're dealing with as it relates to the African American community, that in 1953, that should say 1953, African Americans used 5% of them used menthol products. By 1968, it almost tripled. By 1976, it had tripled again. By the middle of this last decade, it was at 82%. Today, we find ourselves, or what I call the African Americanization of menthol cigarettes. African American adult smokers, 85% use these products, and 94% of teenagers who smoke use menthol products. So where did this come from? I won't go through all the pictures and all the things that are associated with this. And I'm going to come and conclude with this. Be appraised that their special marketing was targeting to African Americans to bring that tripling and stuff about. The things that are being handed around, these flavored little tobaccos, this is an important stat. This is recent data. This came out in August. This is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report that comes out from the CDC. Among black male high school students, cigars are more common products, the things that I'm sending around to you, currently used, whereas e-cigarettes are the most commonly used products for all other racial and ethnic groups. So there's a multiplicity of things going on, and we have to, as I like to say, we have to work both sides of the street, that there's also not only the Juul explosion going on, but there's the continued menthol explosion that I'll actually go into in a little bit more depth here. Unfortunately, I think there's been a predatory relationship between the tobacco industry and the African American community. I'm going to show you some data, unfortunately, that will support that. This is the tobacco industry's words, focus communities and non-focus communities. This terminology was, we had a friend, she became a friend, who worked in the Cool Mix campaign of 2004 for the tobacco industry. The Cool Mix campaign was this big event where hip-hop groups would get together and DJs, and they'd do a scratch-off, and it would all culminate in Chicago in 2004. She was part of it, and she was appalled at what she read, and she brought some of those documents out, and this is LaTanisha Wright, and this is what the documents she brought out. That there are focus communities and non-focus communities, and unfortunately we know that focus communities are inner city, colored, poor, and black, while non-focus community, this is the tobacco industry's words, not my words, upscale, suburban, rural, and white. Menthol cigarettes are cheaper, the promotions are greater, et cetera. And we said, oh wow, could this be true? So then we actually funded a colleague of Bonnie's, Lisa Henriksen at Stanford University, to do a study. Punchline is, as the percent of American students increased, the proportion of menthol ads increased. There's a dose-response relationship. The tobacco industry has known about this, and it wasn't until we funded someone to do the research on this began to see that there is predatory marketing going on. The proportion of the menthol advertising, each one of those little bump ups was at 5.9%. Newport promotions were higher, and I guess the thing that concerns me most, and I would encourage you guys to be concerned about, the cost of Newport cigarettes are cheaper in the African American community than in other communities. This is a study done here in California, looking at all schools around California. This study done in Massachusetts and Boston. Some of you are familiar with the different communities there. Dorchester, historically a more African American community. Brookline, more upscale and white. Punchline there are more advertising in Dorchester. The ads are larger in Dorchester. The menthol ads are disproportionately greater in Dorchester. And I guess what pisses me off the most, cigarettes are 50 cents cheaper. Okay. I actually have data that's nationwide. We won't go through that. This is an established fact, and this is the importance of the question of flavors. I've said this a lot about African Americans and go on, but be appraised that this isn't just about black folks. Menthols are the new cigarette of choice. This is a recent study. As cigarettes have been going down, and they've been going down over the last number of years, cigarette use, menthol cigarette use has been going up. Cigarette use is going down, but those who are using cigarettes are using menthol cigarettes. Great study done by Valente in 2016 that increased from 35% to 39% over a period of 6 years. That in all age groups we see these increases, not just in kids. And I think more broadly that it's not just African Americans anymore, that whites, Asian Americans, and Hispanics are choosing menthol. I have another chart in another presentation. As cigarettes going down, the use of menthol cigarettes are going up. Who smokes menthol cigarettes? I just highlight in this slide women. Be appraised that for all racial and ethnic groups, women are the ones who mainly smoke menthol cigarettes. Be it understood that in the 1930s when they came out in the 20s, but when they really began to be marketed in the 30s, it was a woman's cigarette. It was new, it was different, it was cool, it was refreshing. And that has stuck, and even today, 52% of all menthol smokers are women. Of course, kids are smokers, and I've already heard much about this. 80% of youth, 12 to 17, start smoking using flavored cigarettes. This is not, Bonnie has already gone through that. It's a great study by a colleague. Less experienced smokers in middle schools are more likely to smoke menthol cigarettes, meaning if you haven't tried it before, you're more likely to try a menthol product. He actually had very good data on this. Puerto Ricans disproportionately are using menthol products. The LGBTQ community is disproportionately using menthol products compared to the heterosexual community. Native Hawaiians are this is great, this is the Hawaiian State Department of Health for the last decade before. Notice the menthol rise. It kind of looks like what happened with African Americans. It's a similar phenomena that goes on. Filipinos disproportionately use menthol products. And we come to find out, and when it's used in different parts of the world, that there's different amounts of nicotine, and usually they're higher in nicotine. Let me just digress, and I need to just say this here. There's a symbiotic relationship between menthol and nicotine. You can lower the nicotine level, as the FDA suggests that you do, but if you increase the menthol concentration, you get the same throat hit. They affect the trigeminal nerve, which runs from behind the ear down here and like through there. That's what people, that's a nice hit. If you can manipulate the relationship between menthol and nicotine, you can replicate that. Folks with mental health issues disproportionately use menthol. Okay. Are you getting the sense that there's a certain group of marginalized people, a number of people of color, that are disproportionately using this product? So, what is menthol? Why are we even having this discussion? And I will castigate the FDA later at the end of my presentation. The key thing is that menthol masks the harsh taste of of cigarette smoke. I like to call it the ultimate candy flavoring. Menthol helps the poison go down easier. A colleague of mine, UCSF, put it to me this way: if you didn't use flue-cured tobacco and didn't have menthol in it, I'm going to show you in a minute that all cigarettes have some level of menthol in it, you wouldn't be able to smoke it. It'd be like what went on in these forest fires up here. You can't inhale it. You have to get it under a certain way. Menthol plays that role. Menthol, of course, like when you had Vicks Vapor Rub or you have menthol in some of your other products, it has a cooling sensation, and it activates taste buds. We the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Project, funded a study in 1999 that showed that menthol activates the same taste buds that capsaicin does, and capsaicin is the active ingredient in hot sauce, and hot sauce is an irritant. Well, menthol is an irritant flavor. It's an aldehyde, but some people like hot sauce. A lot of people like hot sauce. Okay, the tobacco industry knows all this stuff. Anesthetic effect, it gives you a certain cooling and feel that you can inhale more. Mimics bronchial dilation. I remember we had a debate at the FDA. This is back in 2010-11. People who use menthol cigarettes inhale deeper. We have data on that. We thought that meant that their bronchi and trachea were expanding. And what we come to find out, they're not expanding. It mimics bronchial dilation. You just force more down. You just take more in. You inhale deeper. The more nicotine you intake, the more addicted you become. Mentholated cigarettes inhibits nicotine metabolism. When nicotine is metabolized in the body, it's metabolized in the liver as cotinine. If you use menthol with that, it slows that process down. It slows that process down. This is great. Independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters. In English, what that means is if you smoke menthol cigarettes, it activates more nicotine receptors in your brain than if you didn't smoke menthol cigarettes. This is the thing with flavors and aldehydes. Flavors are also doing, so nicotine is also doing this, but flavors are also helping to attenuate this. It's a great study that we funded, the lie straight, 2013, time's moving very fast, 2013, Brody and folks in Southern California that actually showed that people who smoke menthol cigarettes produce more nicotine receptors. Increased salivary flow, transbuccal, these are some big words, okay, in English. If you chew tobacco that has menthol in it, it crosses the gum barrier much more effectively than if it doesn't. Similarly, the greater cell permeability, if you smoke menthol cigarettes, the cigarette smoke penetrates cells much more effectively than if it didn't have menthol in it. This is the ultimate candy flavoring, okay? It's doing all sorts of things with it. This is a great slide, 1993. The tobacco industry used to hold yearly conferences, tobacco conferences, and all their scientists would get together. In 1993, their conference was on menthol. This is a slide from the tobacco industry. The punchline of this slide, all cigarettes have menthol in them. The more you have, the more of those conditions I just showed you on the previous slide take place. And why did they do that? Because they want people to inhale deeper. They want people to do this type of stuff more. There are racial difference in cotinine clearance. Independent of what I've been telling you, African Americans clear cotinine much slower. Now that's another issue having to do with actually the biology, but when you add the biology together with the menthol, what slows it down, and you already have a biology that slows it down, and you're using menthol, then this is what happens, is that it stays in your body longer, period. There's usually, and I did this slide years ago, usually menthol cigarettes have more nicotine in them than other cigarettes. That's not always true, but sometimes that is true, and that should always be kept in mind when we're looking at this. I've already spoken about this, you inhale deeper and last longer. Flavored tobacco products are more addictive and harder to quit. Look at it this way. Menthol, melanin, is the stuff that gives color to your skin. Nicotine is stored in tissues that contain melanin. Punchline is the darker your skin means the more nicotine is stored in your body. Okay? So when you begin to add all these things up and the slower metabolism of this and the greater receptivity in your brain to menthol and the darker your skin, you begin to see what the burden is on communities of color as relates to this. Menthols are harder to quit. Now there's a number of studies that show this. Why I like this particular one is that folks who use menthol try to quit more often, and at the same time they fail more often. And that's because of these sensory things. There are more things going on. It's harder to quit. That's just the data. That's just, we know that. I'm gonna go back to Bonnie's talk about how they didn't regulate. What happened in 2008, a number of us became aware that there was going to be the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. And we found out that they were not going to include menthol. They outlined 13 flavors, whether it was licorice, strawberry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, were actually removed from cigarettes. The only thing that was excluded was menthol. The only thing that was excluded. So all those people I talked to you about, African Americans, women, youth, Native Hawaiians, Filipinos, LGBTQ folks, Puerto Ricans, behavioral health issues, all of those folks got thrown under the bus. That was 10 years ago. I guess you might look at it this way. When President Obama signed this act, there was an amendment that we forced through the political activism of some of us, that the first thing that the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee for the FDA should do is take up the question of menthol, which they did, and a number of us went back to Washington and testified this a number of times. I won't go through the whole history of how menthol has been kind of not dealt with. The new deal that's being put forward by the FDA today, while I think it's only taking them 10 years to kind of get their act together and talk about, this is my last slide and I'll shut up, get their act together and do something about this, is to be commended. The problem is taking them out of combustible cigarettes but leaving it in e-juices, which we started this conversation with. It's the same mistake all over again. It's addicting another generation of kids, just using a different method. Why this whole idea that somehow adults are going to use menthol e-cigarettes to quit, there is zero data on that, zero data. I want to encourage us to meet at the local level. A number of us in the audience were at Alameda City Council meeting last week where they passed citywide ordinance to do this. Of course, what went down in San Francisco, what's gone on in Richmond, and Beverly Hills and around the country. There are different levels of restriction, but citywide restrictions are the toughest, and like that. I want to encourage Albany to do the same thing. Marin County's done it. Alameda, yes, I am Alameda City. Santa Cruz did it the same day that Alameda did it. With that, I'm going to stop. I just want to thank you. This is how I can be contacted. Last thing I'll say, and I think why this has even become an issue is because of the Juul explosion, and it's affected a lot of kids, but be aware that the flavors question has been an ongoing question in poor communities. It's really a social justice issue, and essentially the Juul explosion forced the FDA's hand. If we're going to do something about it, we're going to have to obviously do something about menthol, and even though I think they've taken a half step in terms of that. Today was introduced by, what's his name, Bunny? Last week, introduced in the state legislature a bill to curtail the use or outlaw the use of flavored tobaccos in California-wide. I don't necessarily fighting at the state level. The further up the food chain you go, the harder it is to fight with the tobacco industry. Having said that, why don't I stop? I'll take any questions that you have.
Are there any questions from council? hang on a minute. Nick, do you want to start?
Sure.
get
Thank
to
you. And thanks for your presentations. So the sale price is lower in African American communities, I think is one thing you said.
That's correct.
So that means that the the people who sell the products to the stores are selling at a lower price, and so it's the what would those people be? The
distributors?
distributors. Yeah,
Right.
thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
and you also said that. Can you repeat the thing about clearing cotinine that I didn't quite understand that one?
There's two things with that. When you smoke a cigarette, the nicotine is metabolized in the liver as cotinine. And then to clear, how long does it stay in your body before you pee it out, is dependent on a number of factors. One of those factors is menthol, slows that process down. Another factor, which is, we didn't know this, but African Americans have slower clearance rates. When you add the two together, it's not a good thing.
Sure, thank you.
We're learning. It's not just to menthol, but flavors in general. An important price thing that I didn't mention is.
I think you might want to get up for the cameras.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay. Now you're gonna make me look really short.
You were always really short.
I know it's bad. So the Juuls, we did some calculation on Juul prices, and it does come to the flavors because of the fact that that's where the flavors are in the kids. For across all the products are about $16 for a pack of 4 pods, which is again equivalent to about 8 packs of cigarettes. So that's about $4 for a pack, for a pod. It is $8 to buy a pack of cigarettes, right, of any sort.
8 to
about
$10.
8 to 10, depending on where you are. So their Juuls, which has all the flavors in there, and other vapes are actually less expensive than our basic cigarettes as well. So just something to know. And kids are much more price sensitive, so they're going to go after those.
Is that because they're taxed less?
No.
Or is it?
No, Prop 56 put the tax on all tobacco and vaping products. It's just industry.
The industry's manipulation of this has been going on since day one. There was a great article, and I'm going to just paraphrase it here now. And I believe, it was in The Hill, the thing that comes out, and he says, step back a minute and look at it. The tobacco industry must have an incredibly warm relationship with our congressional bodies. Here's a product that we know kills, 480,000 people in the United States a year. And if you had another product like that, it would be moved off the market immediately.
Well, that's not
So it's our history of using these products and their disproportionate use in certain groups that has let it go on and on and on. Other questions?
I would disagree with that. We have guns.
I would agree with that, too.
Good point. Very good point.
Good point. That does it for my questions. Thanks.
Rochelle, do you have any questions? Michael?
So are you in 1111 Franklin, where are your office is now?
Am I at Franklin Building? That's where the Office of the President is. I'm at the Kaiser Building. That's where the tobacco-related disease research program is, the breast cancer research program is, and the AIDS research program is. We've been there since the 90s.
I used to work in both of those buildings.
No, I still do.
I was just curious. So one argument I've heard against cities moving is, well, you're just wasting your time because the feds are going to jump in and regulate this really soon, so you might as well just wait.
Well, unfortunately, it's taken them 10 years to actually announce that they're going to do something. The process is going to take a good 6 months for an actual ruling to be put forward, and then there's going to be comments from the public once they actually put forward a permanent route, they're going to get sued by the tobacco industry. That's going to be, we're going to be bound up in court for years. I want to encourage localities not to lose sight of that. What also is going to happen, and we've talked about it here a little, the FDA ruling is going to allow menthol and mint and spearmint to stay in e-juices. They're going to put all those other banana-flavored things behind closed doors, but you can still up front buy these e-juices. The FDA, waiting on the FDA, I don't think is a good strategy. I think it's a losing strategy. And if we're concerned about the health, I sent you guys a letter about this, the health of Albany citizens, which I think you are. I think you need to act.
Excuse me, we'll do public comment in just a minute. Other questions? Okay. Okay, I will open it up to public comment. You can ask questions of either of our presenters or make comments. Keep in mind that the council will not be making a decision tonight. This is simply a study session. Ann, do you have any cards? I'm sorry?
He has cards.
Okay. No, I'm sorry, I meant speaker cards.
Oh.
You're welcome to line up and speak. Are the cards in the back? At some point, we would like you to fill out a speaker card and submit it, but if you want to speak first, that's fine. And if you could give your name, that would be great.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City staff, City Attorney. Dr. Halpern Felsher, thank you so much for that presentation. Dr. Gardner, same to you. One thing that I didn't hear was about access. And the reason I ask about access is I represent someone who runs a retail store in Albany called Better Cloud, and who's been here for the better part of over 5 years. That individual sells only e-cigarettes. And I'm not here to dispute the findings, the research, and the very, very lengthy amount of legwork that's been done by the studies. My client is not interested in deregulation. My client is interested in following the law. From his inception in business in the city, he's done nothing but comply with the law. He has a ledger of every customer of his. He's never sold to a minor and never will. And in fact, he's now implemented new restrictions on entry and will not allow even a child to enter the front door, and never has, but more specifically is now locking the front door and waiting for an ID to be presented before entry. So really my question is, and I'm not at all, of course, picking on either of you, but how are children accessing this? Is it online? If you can address that, that would be very helpful for me to.
Well, when
Could you come back up because I think we're being filmed?
Thank you for reminding me, ma'am. In all fairness, I grew up I was born in Berkeley. I was actually born off Gilman Street, and where married student housing is. They were the projects for African Americans then. I was born in Berkeley, raised in Oakland. How did I get my cigarettes when I started smoking? I get someone to buy them for me. That's how kids generally get it. Most merchants aren't out there selling it to kids. We know that. That's not the point. The point is it's available, and we're saying these things should not be available. That's how many of them get it. There's stuff online. There's a lot of different ways that you have access to it. But the main way, my friend's brother would buy us cigarettes, okay? If the menthol cigarettes weren't there, they wouldn't have been able to buy them. Bonnie.
Thank you. I totally agree with everything Phil said. To add a couple more things, what I didn't make very clear is when I was talking about youth, I was talking about adolescents and young adults. So really our studies go up until the young 20s. So you're still, because of brain development and things that could take another 45 minutes to discuss, you still got the brain development and other issues where young adults are more likely to be using flavored products and to become addicted to them. So that's one thing. The other thing is we actually published a study a couple years ago, and I'm happy to share it with council, and I may have already, I can't remember, where we looked at where young people are getting these products. And not in Albany per se, but across California. And it was vape shops. And I know, and I applaud the client you have for locking the doors and everything. That's fantastic, but not everybody's doing that. And so we do have that problem. But also, as Phil said, it's very much an issue where where young people are, when we ask them where they're getting them, it's either vape shops, smoke shops, internet, and from each other. And so somebody above their age is buying them for them.
So I understand, and I know the time issue here, but I'll end by saying this. My client has paid taxes. My client has done everything that he's supposed to do. It's truly unfortunate that this seems to be a repeat of what happened in even my generation in the early 80s when people were smoking all around me, and access was much easier. I don't think that the same is true today. However, I do think that online is a large marketplace, and that's where a lot of the youth are getting their products. I employ you to consider adhering to the federal government and their regulations, at least as it relates to the city of Albany and the restrictions that you decide to implement. There are other ways. You can put an age limit of 21. You can do a number of things. My client doesn't advertise, and he has gone relatively unnoticed for the better of 5 years. So I will be in touch, I'm sure, in the near future, and look forward to speaking with you all later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What about, and maybe our speaker says, what about unflavored vaping products? Is the Fed, or does the federal government plan to regulate?
That's another good question. You can still, we're trying to push back against flavors. If it's a tobacco product and it's tobacco flavored, it's not, that's not in part of the legislation. It can be tobacco, but it can't be bubble gum and Chewy Bear and all this other stuff. Menthol, no. But if it's tobacco, yeah. Good question.
Okay, what I would like to do now is, as the speakers speak or ask their questions, whatever, if we could save the answers until the very end, because we do have a limited amount of time, and I think that'll make it flow a little better. So, young ladies, would you like to come on forward? Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you. Hi, this is Wendy.
And Rachel. Tobacco companies should prohibit flavored tobacco because the flavoring is not only bad for you, but tobacco companies are using the flavoring to attract or bring more kids to try and smoke tobacco. Tobacco companies are trying to addict kids, especially at young ages.
I mean, do we really want this for young kids like us? Flavoring is a way of tobacco companies trying to sell more tobacco and make it sound more enjoyable. But at the end, we know that tobacco, with or without flavoring, is still bad for you. Why add flavoring to it when it's just as bad? We encourage the city of Albany to ban flavored tobacco. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll wait just 1 second. I'd also like to remind you that we do not applaud here. We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable, and we want to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to speak. Okay, Superintendent Williams.
Thank you. My name is Val Williams. I'm the superintendent for the Albany School District, and if I may just say, I'm very proud of our students for speaking up. Actually, tonight I have been asked to speak on behalf of Yael Bloom, who is a parent and a community member in Albany. She had to leave, and she wanted me to give you some information. The students in Albany take what is called the California Healthy Kids Survey, and she wanted me to share with you that from the years of 2015 to 2017, under current use for ninth graders, went from 3% to 17%, which is a 466% increase. And for 11th graders from 2015 to 2017, went from 8% to 18%, a 125% increase. In terms of using at school, ninth graders reported from 2015 to 2017, 1% to 7%, a 600% increase. And for 11th graders at school from 2015 to 2017, 2% to 7%, which is a 250% increase. So on behalf of Yael Bloom, thank you very much.
Thank you. No. No.
Good evening. My name is Brian Davis. I'm a member of the Alameda County Tobacco Control Coalition. I also run a project called Just For Us LGBT Tobacco Prevention Project. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities smoke significantly more than the general population, and 53% of LGBT smokers smoke menthol, compared to 27% of the general population. One study has shown that 71% of queer young adults 18 to 24-year-olds smoke menthol. The LGBT community community has a history of being targeted by big tobacco, from buying the silence of some with donations to AIDS service organizations and GLAAD to ads in the queer press suggesting support for LGBT equality paid for by tobacco companies that are among the major donors to right-wing legislators that work against our rights. LGBT people smoke more because of homophobia and transphobia that cause great stress, especially among our queer youth. Policies that restrict menthol and other tobacco flavors make it less likely that queer youth will turn to tobacco to take the pressure off, and more likely that they will be able to live long and healthy lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having this discussion. My name is Paul Cummings, and I've been living in Albany for 13 years. I also work for Alameda County Public Health Department in the Tobacco Control Program. But I'm speaking tonight as a resident, and there are a bunch of things I want to say about this. I guess the first is I just want to mention blunts, because that hadn't been mentioned. So a lot of times young people or adults are taking flavored cigars, they're cutting them open, and they're putting in marijuana. And, and then they're ingesting both or consuming both marijuana and tobacco. And so I think that when we're thinking about banning flavors, we also need to be thinking about how this other substance is being used as well. I think that young people are really clueless about these products, and most of them think that they are vaping stuff without nicotine. I was over at Cornell just after Thanksgiving with my third grader, and around the corner there were a couple of middle schoolers that were vaping, and they tried to tell me that they were just vaping dry ice. Told them it was a tobacco-free campus and they needed to leave. But this is what our young people, they have partial information at best, and then they're making decisions that could get them addicted for the rest of their lives. So thank you for discussing this.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much, council members, for addressing this really critical issue for our society, and particularly protecting our youth, who are among the most vulnerable members of our society. My name is Pauline Bondano. I'm the Executive Director of Community Health Education Institute, also a member of the Alameda Tobacco Control Coalition, and I'd also worked at UC Village with some youth programs there through the county, and I do my shopping in Albany and come here as often as I can because I really respect and love this community. So we've had studies in Marin County and films put together that were shown at UC Berkeley from 14-year-olds who are now addicted to nicotine via smoking jewels. And the youth who are in these films, you can go on YouTube and see them for yourself, talk about how they can't go more than an hour because there's more nicotine than they're exposed to that they would have had in traditional cigarettes, how they're not able to cope with the stress in their life or their studies unless they have jewels. But it's still considered so cool, and very few of their age group is aware of the nicotine dependence or the nicotine that's in that product that's developing this dependence among youth. I mean, the strategies of the tobacco companies are almost, incomprehensible, and the way the culture is ingrained from the founding fathers of the United States with the cigarette and tobacco use. And in terms of vulnerable members of society as well, they've done measurements in Head Start programs where the absorption of cotinine, the byproduct of nicotine, is much higher among African American children. In some of the studies, it went as high as almost 40% higher. So it's definitely a social justice issue, and the way it is being marketed and the way it's affecting our communities. I worked for Berkeley Unified School District for some time, and there we found a disproportionate use of blunts, as Paul Cummings just discussed with you, among African American students, and how that seemed to reflect students who had a high proportion of failing tests, dropping out of schools as well, and particularly in communities of color. So these are really important issues to ensure success for our students, for their future, for their longevity, for their ability to get a good job and live in a community where they're going to have longevity as well.
I also wanted to mention my son who did smoke for a year, as well was a former smoker. He had no problem at 15 finding all kinds of kids to buy, I mean not kids, over 18-year-old or 21-year-olds to buy tobacco products for him. So, you know, that's not an issue that most kids face in most communities. They're very clever at coming up with ways to do that. And the increase among smoking with 14-year-olds with flavors is particularly important. Thank you again for your time and recognizing these issues.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Irene Nika, and I work for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I'm also a resident of Albany. I attended Albany Middle School, Albany High School, so this is a professional issue and very personal as well. So I don't know if you know this, sadly, 95% of adult smokers begin before the age of 21, and it's no coincidence that these products, flavored tobacco products, are marketed in flavors that are very familiar to children: Jolly Rancher, Sour Patch, Gummy Bear, Cotton Candy. There are even packages, as you saw earlier, that the packages look like candies as well. So we really need to protect the youth. I hope that you guys, I know you're taking the first step tonight to hear all of us and gather this information, and I'm hoping that you will pass a comprehensive ordinance to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco, similar to other cities like Richmond, that create a minimum pack size of cigars and cigarillos and restrict new tobacco retailers from locating near sensitive areas such as schools and libraries and things like that. And thank you, and please protect our youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Schneider. I'm a resident of Albany, and this is a very personal issue for me. I first wanted to speak about the fact that neighboring cities have enacted pretty robust regulation in this area, and so I think it would be effective and feasible for Albany to follow suit. We wouldn't be a little island of regulation. It would be a larger body. And on the personal side, I just wanted to speak very briefly about how you all know nicotine is really addictive and it can hurt lives and kill people. My mother started smoking when she was a teenager. They didn't have mango-flavored Juuls then, so this wasn't a flavored tobacco issue, but she had a lot of motivations to stop smoking. She had asthma, I had asthma, etc. She couldn't quit. She smoked her entire life until it killed her. And it's not so much the fact that it killed her that concerns me about tobacco. It's how limited and blighted it made her life. I won't go into details because I think you all know that nicotine is really bad, but I really hope you will regulate flavored tobacco products so kids don't start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Monica Eisenbud. I am a physician. I have a grandson at Albany Middle School. One of the things going on is that kids are using these materials in school increasingly. They can use them in the bathroom. They can use them in the back of the room. If a teacher comes by, they smell blueberry flavor or whatever. And it can lead to tense standoffs between, if they're discovered, students and staff, but mainly it's undiscovered. And then it becomes exciting and contagious because it becomes a game. And of course, there are the bathrooms and so forth. So, and in one of the presentations, it was mentioned that, well, a student will just take another puff of flavor. What I think is really going on, they're taking another puff of nicotine because they're already addicted, but they don't know that that's what they're actually doing. I want to mention just the history of deception by the cigarette tobacco-making companies from way back, but the latest, I still get newspapers in print, and for instance, New York Times has daily full-page ads by Juuls saying, parents, everybody tries 40 times to quit smoking before they succeed, and then they use Juuls to switch. So they're appealing to parents concerned about this issue, in their young and saying, but parents, you need this product. And it's a kind of roundabout way of trying to keep parents on their side, and very wicked. I just want to mention the importance of local action. I've been in many political causes, and it's act locally that counts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Gratz-Lazarus. I work with the Alameda County Tobacco Control Program, and I'm here to just provide some information around this subject. Experience from other jurisdictions that have restricted the sale of flavored tobacco have shown that retailers can and will replace lost profits from the sale of deadly flavored tobacco products with profits from healthier products. Flavored tobacco restrictions can support retailers to find other products to sell that don't kill when used as directed. Regarding price, we know that when tobacco is cheap and pack sizes are small, tobacco products are more affordable for young people to buy. This is why some jurisdictions have decided to require minimum package sizes for cigars or minimum prices for little cigars or cigarillos. Pricing is hands down the most effective strategy for reducing smoking. And we know that cigars and little cigars are available for under $1. You can see them in the basket that's being passed around. Many are cheaper than the price of a candy bar. Despite claims that vaping products like Juul are marketed to adults, a new Truth Initiative study published in October of 2018 finds that teens are 16 times more likely to use Juul than older age groups. Regarding e-cigarettes as cessation, electronic smoking devices are not approved by the FDA as a smoking cessation product, and while there is anecdotal evidence that some people have successfully used electronic smoking devices to quit smoking cigarettes, research has found that many people who attempt to quit smoking by using e-cigarette devices end up with dual use of both traditional tobacco and electronic smoking devices. In recent years, 28 California jurisdictions have passed local ordinances restricting the sale of flavored tobacco products. 15 of these are located within the Bay Area. And I just wanted to lastly mention that ChangeLab Solutions provides free legal technical support and information to jurisdictions who are considering tobacco control laws, including tobacco retail licenses with flavored tobacco restrictions. They also have a comprehensive tobacco retail license ordinance model, which includes strong tobacco retail license, flavored tobacco restrictions, minimum pricing restrictions, pack size requirements, discounts and coupons requirements, tobacco-free pharmacies, and density requirements as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Natalie Gasinski, and I'm Albany High School PTSA president. And so one of my jobs this year is to protect the best interest of Albany High School students. So something that no one has mentioned today. So vaping is a very big problem at HS, and every day more and more students become disengaged, not just socially, but also academically. As they lose friendships and get less and less interested in subjects they study, the only thing they care about is taking another bathroom break and vaping. So it's, it impacts the rest of their lives essentially, because all the lost opportunities, if you think about it, it's mind-blowing. And it's really depressing, really. How, as a community, we have to just stand up and just make it stop, right? And protect our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tamara Borgfeld, and I'm a senior at Albany High School. Not nearly a day goes by that I can go to the restroom without seeing someone vaping and inevitably inhaling that vapor. And it's not only an issue to the people doing it, but to the people around them, and damaging everyone's health and education environment at the sake of an addiction. And it's also important to consider the role that pop culture plays in this epidemic. Many rappers or musical artists often talk about popping pills or smoking, or they often talk about how that has been a way out of solving their mental problems, such as depression. And as someone who has struggled with anxiety and depression before, I can see how that would be tempting, especially to youth. And yes, there are many detrimental effects, but the problem is that many youth don't care about that. They know that it's affecting their health, but they keep doing it, and they keep trying it, and they keep persuading others to do it. So I think that it is really important that we take immediate action on this now before it gets worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Annie Tagan. I'm the Regional Advocacy Director for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. We're based in Washington, D.C., but we represent youth all over the country, including the great state of California and the urban city by the bay, village by the bay. And I just wanted to, I won't repeat what's already been said, but I just wanted to applaud you for taking local action on this issue and to repeat what Dr. Gardner has already said, that the FDA and the state of California, while they both may be hinting at taking action, that is going to be years down the line, especially where the FDA is concerned. So I just wanted to, again, applaud you and urge you to take action swiftly. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any final speaker? Seeing no one, will come back to council. Any final comments? Any final comments from our two guests?
One thing I just wanted to reiterate, because we have talked a lot about menthol and the social justice, very important, and about jewels and vapes, but a couple of people did raise the point about blunts and about Lucy's, or the individuals, most of which do come in flavors. So not only, and because youth are so price sensitive, and adults are price sensitive as well, that they can go buy one of those or a couple of those, and those tend to be right on the counter, right up front, like a candy bar would be. So not only would you be regulating out and banning jewels and social justice issues, but really just those individual flavored tobacco wrappers or flavored cigarettes or cigarillos that youth are also using and adults are using that come in flavors. So we're really going to make those less accessible to people if we ban the flavors, because they are predominantly in flavors. That's important. And the other piece about the quit that somebody mentioned is that we have to be careful is perpetuating that idea, not only, as I was saying in my talk, about quitting, but these ads that are going on right now, not directly related to flavors, but very important to say, when they see those ads, not only are you telling parents, and therefore parents to quit, but you're reiterating to kids that these are okay. So these ads really are a way of marketing, and we have to really watch out for corporate social responsibility that's going on with the tobacco industry. Thank you.
Let me just thank you guys for taking this up and reiterate what other folks have said. I think we need to do it at the local level and not wait on the state or the federal government. I appreciate the last comments around blunts. They're blunts, they're blunt wrappers, they're all flavored, they're little cigars, they're flavored. There's flavors everywhere trying to keep people addicted, and I'm hopeful that Albany will take a step against this, and thank you.
Thank you. All right, one last comment.
Hello, my name is Berrin Yavuzer. I wasn't going to talk, but I am a former smoker. I was smoking 3 packs a day. I'm from Turkey, so in my culture, when you are young, you have to prove yourself somehow, and most of the time it's smoking. Like your friends smoking, if you want to join to them, you have to smoke too. So I don't want this culture create here in this country. So please don't let that happen, because it hurts people. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, final council comments, Nick?
Sure, yeah, I believe very much in the Think Globally and Act Locally. I'm so glad we acted on the sugar-sweetened beverage tax, because now other cities can't do it, but we have it. And I think that it's very wise to act locally should we decide to do that. Well, question for the presenters. If you were to pick now that a few cities have done this, is there one city that is the model for how to do this? I know that in working with the sugar-sweetened beverage tax, there's lots of details, and we just kind of copied and pasted from Berkeley because they had done all that work and trying to get it right. So is there another city that really did a good job in getting their regulations right?
Look, this is another excellent question. You guys actually have had some excellent questions. Short history. When we first did this, the first city was Chicago, Illinois in 2013. We established a 500-foot buffer zone around schools and parks. The next level of iteration was what happened in Oakland and what happened in Minneapolis and what happened in St. Paul, where you restrict the sale of these flavored products to adult-only venues. But then it was really San Francisco that set the benchmark of eliminating these products citywide. And I think it's important to look at what they actually did, what Richmond did, what Alameda did, and actually talk to Change Lab Solutions. Because there is a way, there are all these different levels. Some people will forget to write blunt wraps in it, and then all of a sudden their blunt wraps will be available, and like that. But I think, and in fact, I can send you these ones. Actually, I read I had a chance to read, and we testified at Beverly Hills one, but theirs was one of the most comprehensive, and they had based theirs on San Francisco. Alameda's is very good. But I will send, and I'll work with my colleagues, we'll send you copies of all the strongest ones that we have. I would think that what we just did in Alameda was pretty strong.
Well, I think,
wouldn't you say that? Yeah.
I think strong is good, but also defensible is important as well.
Yeah, legally, and that's part of the deal. Good point.
Might be helpful even to develop sort of a model ordinance so that when you come and you're asking, with a little city like this, our capacity for policy development is very limited, and if we can get something from someone that lays out what the issues are and provides us with a model that we can tweak
do that.
to our
And
own
we will do that. I'll be back in the office on Wednesday. I will send you all 4 of them. I want to really emphasize working with Change Lab Solutions. That's free advice on how to do this, and you're right. You can't just come up with 25-page ordinances off the top of your head, and I think that's right. But you should have copies of these things in the next day or 2.
Thank you.
And I was just going to say, and I know, Phil, you sent this, and we both sent it, but if you need more data as well so it can be more defensible, let us know, because we both, I mean, there's not just our own work, but others, there's lots and lots and lots of data to really defend every piece of all the comments that have been made for you. So don't be afraid to ask us.
Thank you.
I was just handed the Comprehensive Tobacco Retail License Ordinance, a model. And this is from Change Lab Solutions. I think there's one for each one.
Thank you.
Great. Well taken.
Any comments? We have about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. We're about to start our regular council meeting, but thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative, and I appreciate that we have some models here to work on. And I look forward to this coming back before council, hopefully soon.
Well, I don't want to make any comments, except to say this has really been informative, and I appreciate you coming. Thank you so much. But here's just a quick question. It's been a few years, but a few years ago, and it seems like in the naive, distant past, there was hope that for seriously addicted cigarette smokers that vaping could help them quit, or at least get the tar out of the product they were smoking, and it would help them. So what's your sense about this? If there were non-flavored vaping products, could they be prescription products that doctors could prescribe for serious smokers, or has that just become a dead end in your thinking?
This is the question that's asked by all pediatricians. If I have a smoker who has tried the patch and tried the gum and nothing's working, should I give him or her an e-cigarette? I think that's truly the most difficult question. I think the jury is still out on the impact of these things. I guess Stan likes to put it this way.
Stan Glantz, I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. Likes to put it this way, the cigarette, you're like jumping out of a 12-story building. You know what's going to happen there. With the e-cigarette, it's more like a 4-story building, and there's going to be some damage, but we're just not sure what the level of that's going to be, but there's going to be damage. And as a doc, I'm not going to suggest that, but we'll let Bonnie know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, but so far the evidence, independent of flavors, is still showing that You've got individuals who are potentially quitting cigarette smoking with a vape, but as a population level, there is not that evidence right now, regardless of whether there's flavors in them or not. It's hard to piece it out because of the flavors, but I would say right now, uniformly, there's not good evidence for us to at least say that, sure, you'll probably be able to quit with vapes. There's more evidence for patches and cognitive behavioral therapy and other things like that. So I would say that there is better evidence that youth and young adults who start with vapes move on to cigarettes.
And then adults that are using these cigarettes, the majority of people are dual users.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. They'll use both.
They'll use both, and that's where we are right now. But these have been very good questions.
Yeah, extremely. And I thank you, too, for all the hard work that you're putting into this and appreciate your attention to this really important topic. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. And I just want to add one thing, Nicole. On our website where you can sign up for certain specific topics, could we add flavored tobacco as one of them?
It's already added.
Okay, great. So if you're interested in this topic, if you go to our website and I want to know about.
You want to show it on the screen?
Sure.
It's through the e-notify link.
That's it, e-notify. You can check the box, and when this comes back again, you'll get an email telling you all the specific information.
And there, too, on our toolkit, we have lots and lots of information on this that we can give you, or you could just take off of the toolkit and put on there.
Okay, thank you very much.
What are our next steps on this?
Next steps will be preparation of a draft ordinance. We actually already have a working draft, but we'll make sure that everything is up to date in terms of recent activity and the information we've received. We'll return that in the next month or so, as time allows.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have about 3 minutes to rest. the Albany City Council meeting for December 3rd, 2018. Please join Councilmember Pilch in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, we seem to have no staff here, so we're on our own, guys. We can run wild. All right, well, I'm going to take roll, and we'll let Ann know what we did. Councilmember Barnes?
Present.
Councilmember Moss?
Here.
Councilmember Pilch?
Here.
Vice Mayor Nason?
Here.
And I'm also here. Okay, we're moving to consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience wishes to request removal of item from the consent calendar. Any council member wish to pull an item? Okay, does any member of the public wish to pull an item? Great, may I have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Seconded.
I can pull. Okay. Councilmember Barnes.
Yes.
Councilmember Moss.
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Nason.
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid.
Yes, and the motion carries. Sorry. Okay, we're on Good of the City. Good of the City is a time for persons desiring to address the City Council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note, city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda item if necessary. Do we have speaker cards for Good of the City?
No. I'm sorry. Yes. Brian Beal, Susan Schwartz. Okay, Ann Organski and South.
Well, I'll call this my post-Thanksgiving speech and just wanted to say a couple things I'm thankful for here in the city. You know, in the election, the Democrats got 40 new representatives in the House, and one of the things that Nancy Pelosi said was that this was a referendum on the voters want their voices to be heard. And I think the thing I'm thankful for about Albany is this is a place where we do have the opportunity for our voices to be heard. And I've never seen in any community, other community I've lived in, the degree of community involvement, and especially through, well, this would drift onto another topic, commissions and committees, and the city council meetings. So, and I think looking back on the 4 years that I've been involved, I think that's sort of the central focus is how can we get people in the community more involved? How can we give them the opportunity to have their voice heard? And I think part of the reason why this is so prominent here is because of the hard work of the staff and the city council and several other volunteers. So I just wanted to take a moment to salute Albany for this accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan?
I'm sorry.
I think you just received this document, but just in case. I'm Susan Schwartz, the head of Friends of Five Creeks, founded in Albany 22 years ago. We work mostly hands-on on urban creeks, watershed, and nature. We discovered the trout in Cotinine Creek back in 1999. We worked for 10 years to bring Sarita Creek back from a chokehold of invasives. And we're delighted that Albany is now moving ahead on maintenance of Sarita Creek near San Pablo. At Cotinine Creek, on your south border, as you may know, Albany, Berkeley, and UC Berkeley share responsibility between San Pablo and the railroad tracks. After several $1 million were spent on restoration of our area's only trout stream there, maintenance was badly neglected, to the extent that all three agencies forgot about $450,000 reserved for that reach of creek. That money now seems to be safely in a maintenance fund, with Albany doing the accounting. But the question is how to avoid repeating the past. The memo you have is in two parts, and tonight I really just want to speak about the second part, the need for simple, low-cost, common-sense, ongoing maintenance, mainly weed whacking, starting essentially now. Let me just quickly go over a few examples of why this is needed. Between San Pablo and 10th, UC Berkeley allowed ivy and brush to take over when Belmont Village was built over several years. The weeds there now threaten the trees, choke the creek, and we're rooting rapidly toward the so-called Creekside Trail. Thanks to volunteers from Grizzly Peak Fly Fishers last Saturday, we had a wonderful work party. These have been cut back to the fence and over a lot of the route. You can now see that there's actually a creek there, but it's going to take continued mowing to keep those from coming back until the roots are gone. Another example, between 8th and 6th, the failure to mow let 6-foot-tall Johnson grass take over along much of the Creekside Trail there. It's moving quickly down toward the creek, where it would be a disaster. The best control there seems to be just simple, frequent mowing. Below 6th, if you're ever there in the summer, hedge bindweed turns it into a creepy jungle in between the sports fields. And getting rid of that is a long slog, but it's pretty easy to cut back. Now, none of this requires permits or expensive consultants. It's not new. Albany, for years, paid 2 people to work on Cotinices every month. And now it's not even your money. It's got this $450,000 fund. There are plenty of qualified landscapers, including some that are working with you now. As you have learned on Cerrito Creek, keeping nature in the city is ongoing and dynamic, and you can't leave it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. After Anne would be Alan Maris and Julie Winkelstein.
Good evening, Mayor McQuaid, council members. My name is Anne Ogonowski. I live in El Cerrito. However, I have been working with Five Creeks, Friends of Five Creeks, for over 18 years, and most of those projects have been in Albany or Berkeley. I'm following Susan without her expertise, just as a weekly volunteer, and sometimes more than that. I like doing the work, believe it or not. I like pulling weeds. I like tidying up. I like the sense that this is contributing to the community's enjoyment of beautiful places and precious resources. I always think of my nieces and nephews and the people that will come after, that this is something that I can help preserve for them. That said, though, I do find that there are times when it is very disheartening, and that is when, after working on a lot, putting a lot of effort into something or to a site, it's just let go, or it isn't recognized. One example is on Cotinices between 8th and 7th. I remember a time, I'm not exactly sure whether it was 2 years ago or 3, we did battle with bristly ox tongue, and the trophy was actually as tall as I am. It was that huge. We took out a lot of bristly ox tongue. It felt really good. Other things now had a chance to thrive. And then I wasn't back at Cotinices for a long time, and I couldn't believe it when I came back because the grass was so high. If there was bristly ox tongue, who knew where it was? It was hidden, and it just felt like, well, one step forward, two back. We'll have to, start all over again. So just for that reason, I urge you to take seriously the need to keep maintenance of the creek a priority. It's for us and it's for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, City Council, I'm Alan Maris. I'm resident of Albany. I'd like to thank Susan for all the work she does to get the city involved in our creeks projects. And remember, we have a sign down there dedicated to the work of one of our city employees, Judy Lieberman, who put in a lot of staff work making sure that Gordon-East's Creek was improved to, for the enjoyment of all of us. But my original message was Albany should be pleased with the November City Council election results. Two incumbents, Peggy McQuaid and Rochelle Nason, were reelected while spending a respectable amount of less than $6,000 on their campaign financing. And they depended more on their record of service to the community to win the election rather than on spending a lot of money. A very effective technique. And they didn't clutter my front porch with a bunch of colorful, expensive, glossy campaign literature. So thank you to the continuing City Council members. Berkeley also passed some important legislation as well with measures O and P, and they passed them by a 70 to 30% margin so that all, and this is also a remarkable demonstration of a commitment to their community, the voters' commitment to their community, and the residents with a $135 million bond measure to provide low-income housing and services for their residents living in their cars and on the streets. Perhaps Albany can join our Berkeley neighbors in the future, in the near future, with projects and careful financing to aid our low-income residents facing housing difficulties and homelessness. At our Albany Community Resource Center, which serves the community on Wednesdays and Fridays, we are only able to refer our clients to services and housing in Berkeley, Oakland, and other neighboring cities. Let's do our share and really make America great again. Really make America great. Please give us some information on your agendas in January about the status of our current affordability project, housing project. And it's been about 6 months since the contract. I think it's about time to hear from our consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Julie, come on up.
Hi, I just wanted to tell a little story. On the 13th of November, I was walking down Marin, and there's a at Ventura and Marin, there's a place where the cement is missing from where the water goes to the bay, and it was completely covered with leaves, and so I stepped down just walking, and stepped a lot farther than I anticipated and ended up flat on my face on the street. So I called the Albany Police Department to tell them somebody needed to fix it, and they ended up sending a police car and then an ambulance and then a fire truck, and it was quite a scene. And I ended up in the ER. See? And so I checked in with the police officer came, took photographs of my hands, which got very scraped, and took photographs of the site. And I checked in with him about a week later, and he said he had turned it in to Public Works. And then I've checked several times since then, and there is nothing there that would let you know that it's an extremely dangerous spot. So I'm not sure what to do next. I've left messages. I think I left a message with Public Works. I would like to see the city of Albany fix that spot, and so that's why I'm here.
And that's Ventura Street, you said, north or south side?
It's the, I can do this, it's the northeast corner, and you'll see that it's steep, and it's right now the leaves are gone because the police officer moved the leaves off there, but what it is that most of the sidewalks lead you directly to a curb cut. But this one, if you're walking down, if you're on Ventura, if you wanted to turn and walk down Marin, you would go with the curb cut. But this has got a weird angle on the sidewalk, so if you're just walking directly down the sidewalk, you don't get led to the curb cut, you get led to this curb. And so I just did the natural thing, followed the sidewalk, stepped down, and as the police officer pointed out, I was lucky I didn't get run over because I was, flat down on my face in the street.
Right, and on Marin, not Solano.
On Marin. It's at the corner of Marin and Ventura.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We should be able to monitor that.
Peter?
We should be able to monitor that. I guess we have a speaker.
I'm Peter Goodman. I'm with the Arts Committee, and I'm going to speak on an Arts Committee agenda item later. But right now, I just wanted to mention the Fall into Haiku program that the Arts Committee does every year. This is our third one. Very happy to see how well it's been received by the community. I'd like to thank everyone for all their poetry submissions and encourage anyone who's watching to be sure to watch for our submission call next year. I did want to say specifically and address this to not just to the council but to the community, anyone who's watching. The storms have kind of beat up some of the signs, and also I'm unhappy to report that 2 of the signs at least that I know of have gone missing. I don't think they've been blown away in a tornado, so someone has perhaps taken them because they like them so much, which is a good sign, of course. But if anyone does find a sign lying around and you can see where it belongs, I'd really appreciate it if someone would put it back. If signs are bent, they're really easy to straighten up. Make a new hole for them if you must, because we've got another couple weeks to go and the weather doesn't seem like it's going to be letting up. So I'd appreciate it if everyone could take care of the signs for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Peter. I know you worked really hard on that, so thank you.
Go ahead.
I was on number 11.
Oh, okay. Oops.
Are there any other speakers for public comment? Seeing none, we will move on. City Council member reports on meetings attended, announcement of future meetings, city manager reports. Council, what have you been doing? Nothing. Nothing. Good.
Pretty quiet this time of year.
I got a few things. I don't have very much either. I did attend, and Councilmember Piltz was there also, the CERT meeting that we had several, I guess it was last week, a presentation on earthquakes, which was certainly appropriate and a very good meeting. I attended a conference call with Tony Thurman's staff, Tony Thurman's former staff, as we're putting together a coalition to work on anti-hate and anti-hate crimes. Went to the Senior Center Holiday Craft Fair and also went down and checked out the sandbag distribution on Saturday, where you can actually have them fill your sandbag, put it in your car, give you a cookie and hot chocolate. I mean, how good is that? You get cookies and hot chocolate. And also today I attended the Alta Bates Task Force meeting. City manager report, please.
Our Albany Police Department has provided an active shooter training to both the YMCA and a local church. I'd like to remind folks that this is available for any organization in town that may need some additional assistance in learning how to best protect themselves from unforeseen and unnecessary violence. Last week, most of the Albany Police Department patrol staff received a training in the use of Narcan, which is a special thing that can be administered to help when someone who is overdosed on an opioid and it quickly reverses the fatal effects. This is beneficial both to a potential user as well as a police officer who may be exposed accidentally. A thank you to our fire department for their attendance in this room last week when we had a very bustling crowd for the Board of Education meeting. We had folks sitting in front of us and through the hallway and against the walls and all in the lobby. We had 3 fire department staff on hand to ensure their safety. So I respect their time in committing to that unforeseen meeting. Also, thank you to our Public Works Department, who has been out in the rain and the wind and the cold and in the night and in the morning and all hours there in between to help us through the recent storms. They continue to provide all kinds of attention to trees and flooding and so on and so forth. And sometimes they're easily overlooked, but they're the first people we call when we need a street cleared, so I appreciate that. Also, as the mayor mentioned, the first sandbag filling assistance day was a huge success. We filled 81 bags. This is, again, kudos to Sid Schoenfeld, our neighborhood services manager, and it was the mayor's idea. We have 2 more days planned, January 5th and February 9th. The event is from 10 to 1. Again, it's at Ocean View Park in the parking lot. And if folks can't physically get to the location, we're also on call.
Do we deliver cookies?
I'd have to check on that, and I don't know that the cocoa would still be warm. 2 more rent review workshops are planned, which will be held very soon, Tuesday, December 11th at 7 p.m. at the Senior Center, as well as Saturday, January 12th at 11 a.m., again at the Senior Center. And finally, just a note on 2 upcoming meetings. We will have a special meeting of the City Council on December 10th to certify the results of the election, hold an oath of office ceremony, and also the reorganization of the City Council. And we're looking to January 7th for the council retreat. We have an annual retreat of the council to review the council's strategic plan, and it's more of a opportunity for a work study session. And of course, that's open to the public as well, and we'll make sure that's posted on our calendar. That's it, thanks.
Thank you.
Question, so the January 7th would normally be a council meeting?
Yes.
So instead of in lieu of the council meeting would be just a retreat?
Right. Typically, we cancel the first meeting in January. We thought this would be a good opportunity to continue working.
Okay, thank you. And then I noticed that netting, the fence is back up around the Albany sign underneath the BART tracks, and thanks to Public Works for that. Any completion date for that project?
We are working to coordinate the landscaping work that needs to occur there, both the grass that goes under the Albany Loop public art sign, as well as some landscaping around the vicinity. I don't have a hard date yet.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to new business. Review of advisory bodies to the City Council. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, quick presentation for you this evening regarding the review of advisory bodies. So in 2010, we had a very substantive review by an intern who provided an in-depth analysis of all of our existing advisory bodies at the time. Since 2010, the council has had a review of advisory bodies about every 2 years. In 2016, the council directed this to be on an as-needed basis. So we are returning to you now in advance of the upcoming term for you to consider if there are any possible changes that need to be made. A review of what an advisory body is. They are created by the City Council, typically by resolution or ordinance. Some more historical bodies were created by City Council minute action. I will not read the paragraph, but you see the philosophy here is really to advise the council on matters that become before the council and are of concern to the city. So in this current review of the advisory bodies, the focus was on relevancy and effectiveness. We did a survey of the advisory bodies. I really appreciate all the responses we received. It was a really good turnout, very informative by individual members of those advisory bodies. Because as you know, they are the ones that sit through their own meetings, and they learn a lot from serving on those boards. The questions as we go through this are changes needed to ensure ongoing relevancy and cohesion with the City Council strategic plan. Also, are there concerns or need for update to the composition, frequency of meeting, or overall framework? I hope you can see this well enough. It gives you what our existing advisory bodies look like, the total number of members, whether there are any appointments by the Board of Education or other appointments. For instance, the Economic Development Committee has 2 recommended appointments, and also the originating document. As you can see, we have 10 active advisory bodies. I will refer back to this slide as we go into depth more on the options matrix. 2 general questions are posed in your staff report in addition to any specific tweaks of particular advisory bodies, one of which is whether or not all advisory bodies should be comprised of 5 members. Interconnected with that is whether the City Council should be the responsible agency for making all of those appointments. Currently, we have some appointments made by the Board of Education. I also prepared a matrix of possible changes. Again, I'd like to underscore that these are just ideas. The council can certainly take what they think may be helpful or leave whatever they think is not helpful. It is a starting point, it's a discussion point, and we will take any direction the council would like to provide. In terms of timing, if there are changes recommended, we will do our best to return by December 17th. That date is important because, as you know, the term of the current advisory bodies is set to end with the city council term, and you will be reseated on December 10th, meaning that appointments can be made thereafter for the next 2-year term. So any changes to the composition or charge of an advisory body would be made before that time, so any prospective applicants would know what they're applying for and what is available and what that group would do. Bear with me. Also attached to your packet, you had a matrix, which I will walk through. Try and make a little bit more usable here. In terms of the recommendations thus far, let me rephrase that, possible changes. These are not recommendations. One that is actually already underway and would be very helpful for anyone serving in the role of chair and vice chair is to have a mandatory training on what it means to be a chair and a vice chair and how some tools of the trade to run an effective meeting. That's something that many of our staff liaisons already do as they receive new chairs and vice chairs, but it's something we'd like to formalize.
This includes Brown Act considerations?
Yes, definitely. And all advisory bodies also have an online training that we've prepared, which they're given once they're appointed. Going more specific to advisory bodies, the Arts Committee, you'll see in the first column is a snapshot of their purpose. This is pulled off of the city website. The recommended change is to focus the charge of the committee to add clarity. The recommendation is below, which again gives the Arts Committee the task of advise the City Council on cultural and artistic matters within the city, including the acquisition and placement of public art. The committee adheres to the Arts Master Plan, the Art in Public Places Ordinance, and Public Arts Project Plan in order to support, develop, and promote art in Albany and increase the economic vitality of the city. The justification is simply that this will help the group focus and primarily on the priority project of the Public Arts Master Plan. Charter Review Committee is a minor change for consideration that the committee would be initiated by the request of the council in advance of any upcoming election when changes to the charter are deemed necessary. Whoops. Economic development. Again, it's interest in focusing the group a bit more. Some of these topics, just in the name, they're very broad. So to help everyone feel a sense of accomplishment and to start somewhere with something tangible, the recommendation is that we continue how they are defined, but add that they would be conducting an annual survey of businesses and utilizing the results of the survey to provide informed recommendations to the council regarding any new policy initiatives needed to further support the city's business community. The justification here is we have an adopted economic development strategic plan. The primary implementation responsibility is really with staff, and you will see some of this coming to you in the very near future in terms of zoning and other ordinance amendments that are quite ministerial. In terms of how we would continue, the third column on the right there, how we would continue the topic, we do have staffing assigned. It is a hybrid of staffing as general with any city of our size. We have the community development planner, really, as I mentioned, in the throes of code language, ensuring that our code language is accessible and friendly to businesses trying to start up in town. We also have project manager to focus on recruitment and retention, and also to continue the programs that we have established by actually the Recreation and Community Services Department, who does a significant amount of business promotion and coordination with the Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, the Economic Development Strategic Plan is underway and primarily administered by staff. An update is scheduled for the council in 2019. We can also increase our business organization support. We have had a staff member assigned from the Recreation and Community Services Department, Shelley Putzer, the director. This role can transition to another person in community development who is focused on promotion and business retention. Also, Public Works staff meets with the Solano Avenue Association on a quarterly basis already. We can also include an economic development impact session on council staff reports. And I should note that as I include this impact section, it could really be relevant to any of the groups that we're discussing to ensure that this topic remains at the height and focus of the council. This laptop. So, social and economic justice is the next group here. You see the current purpose. Again, this, going back to 2010, this has been a very broad topic. In the survey results, we also received some feedback that it's a hard topic because it's so broad in scope. Certainly, you'll see in the current purpose the word environmental issues. So that is something that was noted in 2010 as overlapping with Sustainability Committee. In practice, we've recognized that. We haven't really done the cleanup on that. At this point in time, the proposed change is to look towards a Human Services Commission to refine the overall scope, to advise the council on matters related to aging in place and human services programs. I basically already explained the justification there, but again, it's to add focus, and it's also a direct line to current department staff and organization of the city. So this would have a primary interface with our neighborhood services program, our human services offerings, as well as the senior center programming. Human services and aging in place would become a priority focus for the commission. The neighborhood services manager and part-time neighborhood services coordinator would again support the overall focus in this area. And other topics related to social justice will still be administered. We will figure out how to administer those as priorities arise with the City Council. I envision part of that occurring through the City Council strategic planning process as we get more definition in terms of next steps on how to implement any of those particular topics. And again, another work towards focus is the Sustainability Committee. To update the committee charge, really to serve as a Climate Action Plan Technical Advisory Committee. They would focus on reducing greenhouse gases and adapting to climate change. The updated charge helps modernize the role of the committee and prioritize issues of major concern, which is climate change and adaptation. As you all are familiar with the Climate Action Plan, it covers basically every topic of environmental concern, including waste prevention, water, energy, so on and so forth. So they would still encompass many of those other environmental issues under the umbrella of climate action, and of course, transportation and efficiency. As you know, the CAP 2.0 is underway, and that would result in how this Technical Advisory Committee could continue their work. One more. Get this laptop. Traffic and Safety Commission, a minor change really to, again, clarify and modernize this commission name, basically, from Traffic and Safety Commission to Transportation Commission, really just a professional tweak there, and to ensure that we have ordinance language that properly defines the scope of this commission as they do make decisions. And having that well-defined in ordinance language will be important, especially if something were to be raised on question. The council would then be the appeal body for those types of decisions. That really summarizes the options that staff has presented to date. Again, this is a starting point. I'd be happy to take any questions you have if you'd like to go through these one by one and ask questions, however you'd like to proceed.
What is the will of the council as far as questions, one by one, or just?
Let's have a chance to ask some general questions.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, for the overall on the overall program, how was it decided which of the advisory bodies would be filmed and or videotaped, whatever we're calling it these days? And what are all of the others recorded, and how are those recordings, if they exist, made available if they're not on the website?
Sure. Currently, we started with the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission based on the type of action that is taken by those groups. We also extended to the Social and Economic Justice Commission as well as the Traffic and Safety Commission. Sustainability is not.
So all commissions are video recorded and all committees are audio recorded.
Thanks, Ann. That's
Sure.
very helpful. Sums it up.
Where's Parks and Rec in this?
It's commission.
They meet here.
That leads into my next question, which is the nomenclature. What commissions versus committees versus the library board? What are those distinctions here?
You mean in terms of recordings?
No, what do they signify?
How they're defined. The commissions, in our advisory body handbook, we try to define these. I think it begs the question of a look at those definitions. They're working definitions, if you will. A commission typically advises more on policy and may take action in and of themselves. For instance, through municipal code language for the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Traffic and Safety Commission also takes independent action. Committees were considered more of a working group, a hands-on group, more of the task force-like model, who would actually be out in the field doing work, supporting staff, supporting projects. I don't know that that necessarily is a hard line. I think all of our groups act in an advisory capacity. And as you'll see, some of these were created in 1974. to a couple of years ago. So the terminology has really ebbed and flowed over time.
Do you have other questions? Nick?
Sure. So in the survey that was done, which is a great idea, there's a question about whether or not the respondents think the mission of the commissioner committee needs some tweaking. But unfortunately, are we able to correlate which commission and committee goes with which response? Because there's just a group of responses that, yes, we think there might need to be some change, but then we don't know which committees or commissions they come from as the data is presented to us. Is that available?
As the data is presented, it is not available. I would need to go back and check to see if there's something in the guts of the survey that I could pull out.
Okay, thank you. And then were advisory body members notified that the council meeting would happen tonight?
Our intent was that this is administered by the city council, and advisory bodies are defined by the city council, so that's why we're starting at this open public meeting. As part of the survey that was sent out to all advisory bodies, the header and introduction to that survey indicated that the council would soon be conducting a review of advisory bodies.
Okay, great. And great question about the filming and the videotaping. And we might want to talk about that at some point. But with regard to staff's question about whether or not we think the current selection process is appropriate, I think in order to, well, personally, I think in order to weigh that, we would need the data about what was the original thinking when the selection process was put in place. There must be minutes from the meetings where people deliberated that, oh yes, the Board of Education needed representation because blah blah blah. So I think that if we want to reconsider that, I would think that we'd need that in front of us first. That's more of a comment than a question. So I'll stop now.
Other questions?
I have a question. Are every one of these commissions or committees staffed by sort of a senior staff person in the administrative step?
Yes, and sometimes more than one person.
So do you have some kind of metric or measure of how many hours a year staffing these commissions takes, or a percentage of FTEs, some measure of the workload that the commissions and the committees create?
I know that Vice Mayor McQuaid has asked that question in the past too. We do not have the most useful data on that yet. I would need to circle back with our staff liaisons to get a guesstimate of the workload. I don't know if you have anything free-flowing. Probably not.
Please do.
Do you have a question?
I don't have any questions at this point, but lots of comments, but I'll save those for a while.
Okay. I have one question about traffic and safety, and that's and I was thinking about this the other day about, they are our Active Transportation Advisory Committee. Was there any thought of separating that out? I know it was deliberately put in at one point. It may be a time to think about that. I just wondered if that had been thought about.
The intention now is to include it as it is, as that was an action by the council. It can certainly be readdressed.
Okay.
Here. A quick question. The council is quasi-judicial, and so is planning and zoning, which basically means we have certain sets of rules and procedures we have to follow. Parks and Rec and Traffic and Safety are not, although they make critical decisions as well. Is that correct? So are there some sort of safeguards in place for those commissions, even though they're not quasi-judicial? And before Craig answers that question, the last one is, our old pension board, which I think is also legally required to exist, although its mission shrinks and shrinks over the years as fewer and fewer staff members are under that old pension board. So is that a commission that has to continue to exist for the foreseeable future? So that's two questions.
The commission doesn't shrink.
The role does, in the sense that fewer and fewer people are under the old.
Right, but the money's still being dispersed in the same way. It doesn't really matter
Yeah.
how many
I understand
how many
that.
people are being given their pension.
Well, I'll leave that to Craig.
Yeah, I mean, that's provided for in the charter, so I guess if at some point it'll go away after the last retiree passes on. But certainly the amount of money they're administering is being reduced over time as the payments decrease and the number of retirees in the closed pension system shrinks. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're correct. I mean, the council and the planning commission do make decisions that are classified as quasi-judicial. That means that procedural due process requirements come into play, and those are layered on top of the Brown Act requirements. So as far as the commissions that might be making non-quasi-judicial decisions, and the council, when you're acting in a non-quasi-judicial capacity, you're subject to the requirements of the Brown Act and any local procedures you've established to ensure that people have an opportunity to express their views before decisions get made.
But typically, traffic and safety commissions can make decisions that could affect lives by design of crosswalks or whatnot. Or, and I know this sounds funny, but it does happen that people die a lot from poorly maintained trees. If you look across the country, there's several deaths every year from people walking in parks. The trees have not been well maintained. After a storm, a limb falls and hits them and kills them. I can think of at least one or two examples just in the Bay Area. So because there are some hazards that arise from commissions or decisions that get made that are not quasi-judicial decisions, quasi-judicial, but still are serious. And I'm just wondering, how do cities deal with the degree of seriousness? Is there sort of a stepped degree of seriousness but below that of quasi-judicial or not?
Sure. I mean, there are other things that can be done. I mean, there's community outreach, there's posting notices, there's mail notices. I mean, there are a variety of things depending on the particular decisions being made to notify people who might have an interest in writing input in that decision. But I'm not sure that's as uniform, as formalized as the quasi-judicial rules, because those come out of court decisions that mandate procedural due process protections. So it's more left to local discretion as far as what level of noticing and outreach and community involvement you want to encourage before those decisions are made, depending on how you classify their importance.
But isn't an appeal of a denial of a tree removal a quasi-judicial proceeding before the Parks and Rec Commission?
Would be. There are limited categories of actions where they would be actually making permitting type decisions.
But it sounded like when you were talking about traffic and safety that they would be handling some quasi-judicial matters in the future. Is that true?
They may, and that's what we would need to look at in any ordinance language that is proposed to help focus the group and ensure that their charge is related to Transportation Commission. So as that ordinance language evolves through Craig and staff, well, that's something that we would look at.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? Then I'll open up to public comment. Do you have speaker cards?
Oh, wait, that was I'm sorry. I thought we were still sort of in the general area.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that we were going to ask, we would have a chance to ask about the individual.
Sorry.
Okay. With traffic and safety, I think maybe Ms. Mullins commented to us that the commission is also a bicycle pedestrian advisory body, and that at least the interpretation that was advanced is that only bicyclists and people who are bicyclists or pedestrians can serve on the body. Is that
Jeff, do you want to address that?
Good evening. Yes, the criteria established for the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee it was established by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and it says bicyclists and pedestrians.
So a wheelchair rider or a public transit rider who was not also a bicyclist or pedestrian generally would not be qualified to serve?
I would take a generous perspective on if a person's getting off a bus. I think they're probably walking. And if they're wheelchair bound, I would consider that in a sense a pedestrian. They're using crosswalks and sidewalks. So I can't imagine the council not allowing someone to serve on that kind of a committee because they're in a wheelchair or because they're a transit user. I don't know that that's.
So it's just if they're too vehicularly oriented, they're not supposed to serve.
I want to see
automotive.
The person in Albany who claims to be neither a pedestrian nor a bicyclist.
Well, I know my own appointee was selected because of his public transit, involvement, and so I did want to check on whether that dual role has any significance that we might not be aware of.
I'm not familiar of how other cities have dealt with this directly. I think, but for the most part, I think you do want to appoint someone who is familiar with those modes of transportation. They should, they should be familiar with bicycle riding in the community, and they should, however they do it, be familiar with some of the challenges that pedestrians have in the city as well.
Yeah, I'd argue though that they should also be aware of public transit, ride it once in a while, yep, and be aware at least of the challenges faced by wheelchair users and users of other mobility devices.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Other specific questions? Okay, now we'll open it up to public comment.
Brian Beal, Margie Marks, and Julie Winkelsing.
Such a privilege getting to go first all the time. So, as I was saying earlier, I think one of the most important things in all our goals is to try to encourage community participation, and so that's how I look at this plan. So I think, if anything, in terms of the numbers of people on committees and commissions, we should, if there's any change, it should be to increase the number on the committees and not to decrease. And if anything, we should be increasing the frequency that they're meeting, not decreasing. From my experience, you take the combination of the Brown Act and a committee that doesn't meet frequently, and I think that's a recipe to kill the committee, because it's just very hard to maintain continuity if you're not meeting on a regular basis. In terms of the individual recommendation, the one thing here that I do agree on is having more training on decorum and administration. Because again, it's important that people's voices are heard. The Arts Committee, I don't have much of a disagreement. The Charter Review Committee, I'm concerned about this change. I think they should meet once a quarter as they do now. The Economic Development Committee, I think, should meet as frequently as possible. We need more input from the economic community, not less, because, well, the economy is a difficult thing right now. The Social and Economic Justice Commission. So I think this is one of the greatest things about Albany, is that we have a commission with this name, because this speaks to what people are looking for. They're looking for social and economic justice. When you introduce a term like Human Services Commission, this sounds to me like a bureaucracy. So I think this is one of the most important commissions in the city. I think the number should be increased, and there should be 2 appointees from the school board so that we can get more input from the Education Committee. But I think there should be a spinoff commission. Albany needs a housing commission because this is the biggest problem. It is too big for the Social and Economic Justice Commission, and I think part of it ties into the Economic Development Committee as well. So that's what I would recommend. The Sustainability Committee, I'm kind of finding it hard to believe we're looking at a name that's got 6 words in it. So we're talking about CLAPTAC. I think maybe Environmental Protection Commission might be good, because then that would synchronize with the federal. Last, the Traffic and Safety Commission. Please don't take the word safety out. If you want to call it transportation and safety, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Margie Marks, and I'm a member of the SEJC. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of myself. I wanted to read you something. Albany's population is becoming more diverse with a growing number of residents who do not speak English as their first language. Almost 1 in 6 residents speaks English less than very well. This suggests the need for multilingual outreach for housing programs. It also requires greater cultural sensitivity to the housing needs of extended families and multi-generational households. So this is from the housing element, was written in 2015. I think it's just as relevant today. I'm here to ask you not to change the charge of the SEJC. I think that if it's left up to the staff, that we'll be dealing with resolutions and proclamations, which are wonderful, but I think we need action, and we need a citizen committee to look at these issues in the city, not just city staff. There are a lot of checks that are in place. The plan has to be approved by the City Council. We will be working on aging in place. It's a huge subject matter. I think given the restrictions of the Brown Act, though, we can really only have 2 members at a time working on that issue. So, the other members need to work on other issues. I think we can work in coordination with the Neighborhood Services Coordinator. I think that's a perfect fit. And I did want to say that we were not informed that the City Council was going to be taking this measure up tonight. We got it through looking at the agenda for the City Council. So I'm the longest serving member of the SEJC for over 10 years. I tell you, one thing I've learned is that progress is really slow in this area. And I think, by nature it is. But I don't think that this could be left up to the staff. I think we need a citizen committee to look at these issues. And I would ask you to not make those changes to the SEJC. You can take the environment out. I agree that that would be with the sustainability, but not the other issues, the economic and social justice issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Julie would be Jim, Ari, and Peter Goodman.
I'm also here to talk about SEJC. I'm concerned about the change in the name and also the change in the charge. I'm really, like Brian, I feel like the SEJC is a wonderful thing that Albany has. I feel, in my opinion, SEJC is the conscience of Albany, and I think we need to continue to have this conscience. So to weaken it, to focus on 2 issues would mean leaving out a lot of other issues, such as racism, classism, homophobia, accessibility, transphobia, other social issues that come up in our challenging political climate and their ever-growing inequalities and inequities in our society. And I think that SEJC is perfectly poised to do that. I'm also curious, it seems sort of disingenuous when Nicole was asked if SEJC members were notified to say that it wasn't really their business, basically, it was the City Council's business, and yet you did a survey asking them what they thought, and so it seems sort of disingenuous to say it's not their business. And also, it was pointed out that people felt like issues were too broad, but it sounds like we don't know which of the advisory bodies said that. We don't know if anybody on SEJC, for example, said that. I think that if you want to get input, you should be asking past and present members of SEJC. I don't know. I don't even know how to find the words for how dismayed I was when I saw this. It just breaks my heart. I'm so proud to live in a city that has something that's called the Social and Economic Justice Commission. And also, I want to point out that it's a commission, not a committee, which means that it's not as weak as it was described earlier. It analyzes, discusses, and evaluates, but also makes recommendations, and I would hope that those recommendations were listened to. So please don't change the name, and please don't change the charge, except I think taking out the environment. I agree that that should go with the Sustainability Commission. I also think expanding the number of people on it might be a good idea. I would like to see that there's a requirement that there always be somebody that represents the schools or even represents young people. Like, I know that sometimes it's maybe been hit and miss with the young people that have been on it, but I think it's really important that we get all points of view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jim Beller. On the proposal to limit and change the scope of the Social Justice Committee, the current charge and scope of the Economic and Social Justice Committee differs radically from the proposed new Human Services Commission. The most notable areas of concerns to be eliminated are landlord-tenant relationships, that's one. Two, correcting Albany's history as a segregated community with inclusive policies. Three is advocating for people living without housing, both in Albany and on our doorsteps, and bringing forward proposals for low-income and senior housing. I think it's a beautiful thing that Albany enshrines the goal of economic and social justice by empowering the current committee. I might point out the committee is completely advisory. No city staff projects are instituted without careful consideration of the council. As a small city, there are limits on what we can do, but in a world with very little social and economic justice, I think it's a good thing we work towards that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have such crummy handwriting, you couldn't even read it. Amy Smolens, live on Keynes Avenue. So just over the past week, I've driven, I've ridden my bike, I've walked, I've taken the Transbay bus, I've taken BART, and I've taken AC Transit and used bike share as transportation. So I think I'm pretty qualified to talk about Traffic and Safety Commission. Please don't take the word safety out. Decades ago, when someone here in the city added the word safety, you were forward thinking. Now there's Vision Zero, and everyone else around the country in North America is talking about Vision Zero. So keep the safety in it. As Brian said, I mean, that's really important. We're trying to make sure that that seniors and students and families and everybody can, whatever transportation mode they choose, can travel around Albany safely. So keep it in there. Now, as far as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advocacy Advisory Committee, Albany Strollers and Rollers has always advocated for the use of active transportation instead of bicycle pedestrian. So if you call the commission the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, that clearly includes anyone who uses a wheelchair and clearly includes anyone who walks to transit, as most people who take the bus or BART will walk. So that will certainly allay those, fears that you had. But I think that you really need to include the description of the Traffic and Safety Commission or Transportation and Safety Commission as the Active Transportation Advisory Committee in your description. Otherwise, you're leaving an important part of it out, because now it's mandatory that it serves as the Active Transportation Advisory Committee. So it should be included in the name, incorporated in the description, something of that sort. I know that you are dependent on, oh God, I'm blanking out. What's the other committee? Anyway, another sustainability for environmental issues. Thank you, bingo. But transportation accounts for 50% of Albany's greenhouse gases. So you really have to understand that if we want to meet our greenhouse gas goals and our climate action plan goals, our new climate action plan goals. You have to give big responsibility to the Traffic and Safety or Transportation and Safety Commission. So please include that information when you're changing the description or the title. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Peter will be Kathy Deal.
Again, I'm Peter Goodman. I am on the Arts Committee, and I'm here speaking for myself, but I have been on the Arts Committee for quite a few years and served as chair for a couple of years as well. So I just want to speak a bit from my experience about the proposed changes to the Arts Committee, which I agree are not terribly substantial. But before I do that, I did also want to say that I agree with what is said about the Social Economic Justice Commission. It'd be very sad if you diminished their mission. Getting back to the Arts Committee, though, in terms of number of members, we do very well with 7. We're a working committee. We have a lot of stuff that we do, projects that we take on that require quite a few hours outside of the committee, and if we had 5, I don't think we would get as much accomplished. I'd also like to speak in favor of expanding the Art and Public Places fund to more explicit, to state explicitly that the money in there can go to support things that are not, say, stationary public art, guy on a horse in a park sort of things, but more ephemeral performances, programs, etc. And one way I think that might sell it to the city as far as feeling you're not wasting your money by supporting something that is just very transitory would be to make sure that we record these and have a site on the city website that has all the art that is done over the years. And you can imagine that over 5-10 years there's going to be quite a body of art showing the creativity of Albany. I think that would be a very good thing to add to what we do. Also, defining the mission is good, but the way that it's worded and the way that I see the Public Arts Project Plan currently working is that we have these things that we're supposed to work on for 2 years, and we're kind of locked in. And this, the way that you're wording it now seems to suggest that we're going to be forced to focus just on what is on that Public Arts Project Plan that may have been decided 12 or 18 months previous to that. And that's fine, and I understand why that's a good idea to do that. But I think as the Arts Committee, we really have to be responsive to the artistic ferment in the community, to people with a lot of ideas. We want to be able to not just mandate what the art is, but we really want to be responsive to the community. People come up to us with all sorts of ideas, and we'd really like to have some sort of mechanism where we can be very responsive to those ideas without saying, well, come back to us in 2 years' time. The final thing was the master plan. I think makes a lot of sense for us to adhere to the master plan, but we need to revise the master plan. It's already 10 years old. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor McQuaid and Council, my name is Kathy Deal, and I'm currently the chair of the Social and Economic Justice Commission. And I can tell you that we have one of the hardest working commissions in the city. Look at what we've achieved, the rent review, the ordinance for soda tax. We are working on affordable housing and aging, staying in place for aging. It's just really a very talented, hardworking, smart group, and I couldn't be prouder than to be part of them. And when I inadvertently, via various emails, found out that this was going to be on the agenda, I was also dismayed because we just had a meeting and that it was not brought up to us by our staff liaison that it was going to be on the agenda. So there was no way for us to get together and come up with some kind of a response. So I'm responding based on my own opinion, and I'm really concerned about this whole process. It's led by the staff with no input on its development by the current commissions or committees, which I feel is totally contrary to a democratic process. The commissions and commissioners are composed of persons appointed by elected officials, the city council, and we are responsible for responding to their constituents that they represent. The staff are in paid positions, and many of them do not live in Albany, and so cannot represent Albany's interests the same way that we can. None of the questions addressed on the survey had anything to do with the evaluation of the staff liaisons, and I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. I've been on various different committees or commissions, and I can tell you there's a vast difference between the attitude and between the helpfulness of the different staff liaisons. None of the questions were specific enough to generate the recommendations that were made, from my understanding. And as I mentioned, the SEJC wasn't informed that this was going to be on the agenda tonight. The recommendations are far too narrow and look to me like a dodge to address any of the really meaty social and economic justice issues that are facing the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Brian Parsley, Albany resident. I've got a lot written down here, so I'm trying to go through it real quick. One of the issues that came up earlier was commission, committee, tomato. Commissioners are sworn in, committee members are not sworn in. I believe that's how it still currently works. That's one of the issues. Going through some of the recommendations. First off, let me say that I wasn't notified. Oh, actually, I was. It was on the city website where I learned about this meeting. I'm sorry, but city commissioners and city committee members can learn about it just as well as the rest of the public does. I served on SEJC, and I also served on the Waterfront Committee. There wasn't a city council meeting that I did not look at the agenda in that period of time that I served on those two committees, because I wanted to know what was happening and how it could potentially affect the committee or commission that I served on. The one issue I have with economic development is I do believe economic development is not, that committee is not a true democratic process. That committee is held at 5 p.m. And if you're a working member of the public, you can never attend that meeting unless you obviously take the day off or take some time off of work. But if you work 9 to 5, by the time you get home in traffic, you're not going to be able to probably attend that meeting. Traffic and Safety Commission, I've always hated the word safety because it gives the public a misconception of the charge of that committee. So I think Transportation Commission is a great idea. I think when somebody hears traffic and safety, they're going to think, I've got problems with safety issues in my neighborhood and break-ins. That's not what that commission is geared for. SEJC, I think they do good work. I think in the past, and this kind of goes to the first item with training, there have been issues with SEJC and Brown Act violations. And that's, anybody that serves on a commission or committee should be aware of potential Brown Act violations anytime they're in a meeting with other people. And so I think more training on that aspect actually would probably be better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any final comments from the public? Alan?
Mayor and council members, I'm Alan Maris, a resident of Albany, and a member of the Diverse Housing Working Group. Economic disparity is an incredible problem in this country, in this area, and in this community. And our Social Economic Justice Commission is the only way I think we have right now of addressing this issue. The cost of housing is awful. I mean, people are being removed from their homes. They end up on the street or living in their cars. It's just, I haven't got the word for it, sorry. I think it needs to be addressed, and Social Economic Justice in the Commission is in the best position to do it. I don't see housing and income disparity mentioned in your description of that committee at all, and I think it needs to be there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you. Okay, we had one more, okay.
Hi, David Danby. I just want to echo what just about everybody was saying about the Social and Economic Justice Commission. I think it needs to be supported, kept the way that it has been, and expanded if in some ways. It sounds disturbing to me that there didn't seem to be enough information to people that were on the commissions, or maybe even to the public, that they didn't know what was going on. And I believe it does say something about Albany that we do have a commission like this. When I read what we have at the very beginning of the agenda here tonight, that I won't repeat here, but about our community, it seems to me that that is what we're talking about, social and economic justice. And if we're going to put that on our agenda, there's no reason we shouldn't keep that committee the way it is. Sorry, that commission the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call, anybody else? Okay, we'll bring it back to council. It's my thought that perhaps we should go through this item by item and make our comments. Does that make sense with it to everybody? So I'll just kind of start and we'll see how we do. So the first box is kind of general. May I assume that there's consensus that we do feel that more training is of value to all of our committees and commissions? Okay, great.
May I add, Mayor, in addition to this, we will look into a Brown Act training for all advisory body members that's more applied, perhaps, than the online training, so it supplements.
Might include council, too. Okay, Arts Committee.
Oh, sorry, before you move on from that, just a question. Is there knowledge of a specific Brown Act violation on the SCJC as was mentioned by a member of the public? Okay, thank you.
There was the, and we were both there, the soda tax, the whole, I think that the whole SCJC came to a meeting about campaigning for the soda tax.
At least a majority did, at least 3, but my understanding is that was not an issue.
Oh, okay, I thought it was.
I'm not recalling the specifics of that particular incident. So.
Okay, well,
it was a long time ago.
Let's move on. Okay, Arts Committee. Any thoughts on the Arts Committee? Well, the one thing that I would say, and Peter, you changed my mind, I want you to know. I do think that the Arts Committee does a lot of sort of outside projects, the film festival and like that, the haiku and all of those good things. So perhaps in that case, 7 members is of value. I would suggest changing from Board of Education appointed to 2 council at large appointees. You know, and sort of as a generic thought, and I'll throw it out here just to kind of get this piece of the discussion over with. I'm not really sure why we have Board of Education appointees. I don't know that they go back to the board and report. I'm just not quite sure what the connection is. So I would like to think as we go through here that we maybe remove those and think about an at-large person perhaps, or something else. But in this case, I would say 2 council at large and then 1 appointee from each of us. I think if we need either like, yeah, that's okay, or no, that's not okay, but something has to happen here.
Yeah, that I think is one of the original issues before the individual committees, is talking about who appoints and things like that. Where I'm coming from, I don't have a problem with the school district, or the business community is the other outside group that makes appointments or recommends people to sit on our committees. They're impacted by them, whether it's arts or parks or SEJC or what's the other one that there's a student on.
Keep in mind, a student is not necessarily a school board appointee. We have appointed students. So
yeah, we have appointed students, but they could also appoint students. I think as long as, particularly as long as the school district's part of our charter, I think it isn't inappropriate. Now, if that were to change, perhaps I'd have a different view of it.
What is the value to the school district to have somebody on the arts committee?
Well, I'm specifically thinking students, that I think that does have some value, but
there's nothing that prohibits us from appointing a student.
True, but we tend not to.
Well, maybe
I mean, if we ask the school district to,
and they tend not to appoint students, they tend to appoint adults.
Yeah.
I can say, is having sat on the school board and been on school board meetings when we're appointing people, from the other side, I don't recall there being much value added to the school board in the reports that we ever got back from those people. Assuming we ever got any reports at all. I just can't remember ever in 4 years I was on school board did anything really significant came from the testimony of people on these boards that were appointed by us. I thought it was kind of a honorary thing we did, but it didn't strike me as being really important.
What if we frame this in that there was going to be an appointment by the school board, that they pick somebody, preferably I would say from the high school, but somebody who was a student who had some interest in the arts, that they thought that they would be beneficial. I mean, there was a comment about how our commissions and committees are part of this participatory democracy idea, and it allows more people to participate. As someone who has a high school student at home, I like this idea that we encourage high school students, particularly who might have some interest in government and that kind of participation, to come and be part of the meetings.
I think my question would just be, is it broke? Do we need to fix it?
Well, that's an ultimate question on any of these, I would say.
Is the school district sending someone?
How do they get their appointees? Do they put out a thing through their communication channels, or how does that work?
In the recent past, so I can speak to about the last 5 or so years of the administration of appointments, the school board, the district staff receives the applications that the council did not appoint. So the remaining applicants, their applications are sent to the Board of Education for consideration, and I'm not quite sure how it's administered internally, but you will see that they will eventually put appointments on their consent calendar. I don't know how exactly that goes through the board process of review. They're typically, again, applications that we receive that a council member does not appoint. I have not seen one that's the reverse of that, except for the Sustainability Committee appointment, because it is explicit that it be a student, and so the Board of Education is tasked with identifying someone as a student to serve on that committee. In the past, we've had to work pretty closely with their administrative staff to see that appointment made. As you know, they're quite busy with a lot on their plates.
I think that might have changed over time. I was a school district appointee for 6 years, I believe, or maybe it wasn't all of the 6 years on the Park and Recs Commission, and it was quite formal at that time. I got up and made my case at certain points to the Board of Education, and I also was required to report back to them and give them, I think it was quarterly reports at one point, but I think that it has. The administration has gotten less and less over the years. But in any case, I think it goes back to two things. Goes back to one thing that I said, which is that if we don't know the history, I don't think we should be making the change. There's no one here to speak to why that was done, and there might be a really, really good reason why that was done. And number two, without a formal statement from the school district as well, I don't feel comfortable making any changes in that area.
Do we have to decide that piece tonight? I know we need to move on most of this.
Your decisions on any of this are completely at the council's discretion. At this point in time, if the composition were to stay the same in terms of the total number of appointees, we'd simply post the total number of vacancies as we begin to promote the availability of these serving on these advisory bodies. So basically everything would stay the same for this term.
So what I'm thinking is, could we have a conversation with the school district and ask them what they think?
Absolutely.
I think that might make some sense.
I would also point out there's another, seems to me a great program in this city, Youth in Government, run by the Y. And a lot of those kids, I think, would be very happy to participate in commissions and committees. And if there was a way to get them involved, either via the school district or why, I don't know.
Or we could certainly reach out to the Y.
Yeah.
And I think, I think the idea of having students on our commissions is fine. But if that's what we want, then I think we need to be the ones that are reaching out to the students. I mean, we can certainly reach out to students through the school district. I mean, when I've looked for people to be on committees or whatever, I've reached out to the principals and said, would you put this out in your e-news? Would you put this out in your newsletter? Reached out to the different parent engagement groups trying to, broaden our pool. So we can take the lead on this. We don't have to have the school district be doing this.
Could we consider appointments who were at-large appointments, who might be youth appointments? In other words, we each get an appointment up here on particular commissions or committees, but there's also a kind of a student pool from which to pull appointments at large.
Yeah, we can do anything. I don't make it too limited. I mean, I think if we want students, then we need to find students.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what having them be the at-large makes it.
Well,
I'm not sure I'm understanding, I guess.
It would be a means of enlarging our commissions, committees, rather than just keeping them at 5 or whatever.
What if we just communicated to the Albany Unified School District that we're particularly interested in seeing them fill their positions on the boards with students? They've got 6 appointments. I don't know if any of them are filled by students right now.
Sustainability.
Sustainability, right, yeah.
But specified in that charge. Yeah.
Well, I'd still like to know what they think in general of having appointees. I think that's the first place to start. And if they are interested, maybe having the conversation of sort of the age range.
That's good.
Yep.
So Nicole, is that, you just needed that as direction and that's fine, okay. Okay, so I think we're back to the Arts Committee. So I guess then I would change my thinking to say we'll keep the 7, and if the school district is really interested, they'll have 1, and otherwise we'd have 2 at large. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, Nick and I agree, good. Does that make sense for everybody? So that works, okay.
Sure.
Okay, charter review. Looks fine.
To clarify that, as the revision, if you will, the change in scope for the Arts Committee, is council also comfortable with that, or are we, I don't know if you touched on
I'm
that.
sorry.
For the Arts Committee?
Arts Committee.
The recommended update to the charge to add some more specifics about the focus on the master plan, art and public places ordinance, and public arts.
That made perfect sense to me, and the representative from the Arts Committee thought was on board with that as well. So,
Well,
and I think the comment regarding different types of art, I think that really should and can be defined as we update the master plan to define exactly how those are addressed. The other item is the actual ordinance language and the arts fund. That can also be looked at as the committee begins those definitions.
right, and I think the other question was the sort of the nimbleness of the committee if they get a good proposal to act on it. But it seems to me that sort of comes under the public art project plan, and there's always going to be a plan and a planning process, so I think that still works.
Sure, and there's always the request to amend a work plan if they're finding that it's just not fitting in a box. That can certainly come to the council to be addressed anytime throughout the term.
Okay. So with that, are we set with the Arts Committee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now on to charter review. Are there any comments on that one?
The idea of meeting as needed makes a certain amount of sense.
Okay, so not hearing any comments on that, we'll move to economic development. Any comments on this one?
I do have some comments.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would not be in favor of most of this. I certainly am in favor of our small businesses and the support of small businesses. And perhaps the meeting less frequently is fine. I'm not sure about that part. But the rest of it is too narrowly focused. So the emphasis seems to be on only supporting the small businesses and doing a survey of the small businesses and utilizing those results as regarding any new policy initiatives. So my understanding of what economic development is that that's part of it. Part of it is policies and code and incentives that the city puts forth to encourage the development that the city wants to do. And it's bringing in, it's perhaps redeveloping underutilized lands like surface parking lots. It's into new businesses. It's encouraging new businesses to come. And I don't see how that the charge of focusing only on our existing small businesses is going to do any of that. So the one thing that that would be my preference for the charge of the Economic Development Committee is that they look much bigger, but at least that they're in charge of overseeing the implementation of the Economic Development Master Plan. And let's see, was there something else here? No, I'll leave it at that for now. Strategic plans, it's called, not master plan.
Right. Well, I think that plan is administered by staff in the Community Development Department. I think they can work with the staff on that, but I think staff really needs to be the ones doing the implementation, because they're the ones that are writing the codes and the changes. So I think it's in there. Maybe we need to put the word emphasis somewhere with that.
Well, I didn't say implement, I said oversee, just that they would get reports perhaps from the staff about the implementation. But I guess, you know, I wouldn't, as it's written here, I wouldn't support any of the changes. I don't see that taking us forward. I think that the Economic Development Committee as it is, I think the point about their meeting time is well taken. If there's a compromise that needs to be had, maybe 6 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock, yeah, but 5 p.m. is going to eliminate almost all working people. But the rest of this, I mean, I think that the staff, the notes about what staff is doing under the third column, I don't have an issue with that, but I guess the second column, the change, I couldn't support any of that.
Other comments?
Is the idea to focus them on doing surveys or an annual survey?
The idea is to add focus to the committee, and this is one way of doing that. Again, it's a pretty large topic, and we haven't seen much productivity beyond development of the Economic Development Strategic Plan. This is no fault to the committee members whatsoever. It's just primarily the work in that plan has to be administered by staff. So the things that the committee can focus on are checking in with our businesses, retention, seeing how things are going, trying to figure out the composition and what they may recommend in terms of pursuing policy. Beyond that, I'm not quite sure where the group should go, and that's why the question is posed to the council.
I would suggest a thought, and I'm looking at item D under how topics of advisory body will be addressed. The economic development impact section on council staff reports. I think that economic development considerations are often missing in committee and commission work. And we recently had the issue come up about back-in angled parking, and we're discussing it from the perspective of a safety issue, but it's also a business issue for the business community to understand it and evaluate and comment on whether it affects their interests. Another example, I can think of a lot of examples actually that I know that in the area of parks and recreation programs and things, I just hear from one very common comment from business people is, you council people really don't care what we think. And it would be great to have both an annual survey and an opportunity for the business community, a formal opportunity for a committee concerned about the well-being of the small businesses to take a look at proposals that are in development and coming towards the council before they're fully completed and submitted to us. So I would think about this, changing this D to something like provide the Economic Development Committee with an opportunity to act as a sounding board on on proposals of either staff or city committees and commissions to comment on the potential environmental impact. So it isn't the staff telling the council what the economic impact will be, but rather the Economic Development Committee being consulted about the potential economic impact of something that somebody else is proposing for some non-economic reason.
That seems reasonable. I did want to, what you said made me think that I want to clarify that in the second column, I can't disagree with the idea of the committee reaching out to the businesses and getting input from the businesses. That's always going to be valuable and important, and that's not to be taken lightly. But to make that their sole charge is where I have an issue. Sorry, Mayor McQuaid, I think I interrupted you.
No, you didn't. And I'm just kind of hearing what people are saying, and I'm beginning to think that perhaps the name of the committee is, and the whole committee is maybe not exactly right. The Economic Development Committee may not be the right way to look at it. We now have an economic development strategic plan, which actually really fits more in the staff or in the staff world. But maybe what we need is a business liaison committee, and that's not the right word either, but something to keep the business community sort of tied to the city in some way, whether it's through things that are coming to traffic and safety, or things that maybe the Arts Committee wants to do, or disaster preparedness, something like that, something that hooks our business community to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I think the social and economic justice piece is part of that. So many of our business owners are immigrants. They're non-English speaking. They're not non-English speaking. English is not always their primary language. That may be a better focus for this committee, to be the business outreach committee.
Well, I was going to make a suggestion. So this is actually something that I had planned to spend a lot of time on in my last 2 years of this term, my last term. Would it be okay with the council if I worked with staff on some ideas that I have for how this committee might change? I didn't know until hearing it tonight that the staff, that the committee was having trouble finding ways to be productive. I have some ideas, and could we bring this back maybe for consideration later? With with also considering the ideas that have come up from council members tonight as well.
I would be comfortable with that, but I think I'd also be comfortable getting the feedback from the current members of this committee to, how do they think they could be more focused, or how do they think they could support our economic plan. I'm having a little, this one in particular, it's a little, of all our commissions and committees, it's in some ways it's very broad, and it could be doing a lot of things, but I'm not sure what it is doing or how it is going to be supporting economic development. Sometimes, we can have this committee set up, and things beyond Albany are going to influence how much economic development goes on in Albany. But I'd be curious to hear more ideas. I mean, I really am a little confused by this one.
Could we get the meetings that have been held, say for the past year, posted on the website, that we could, if you said that all the Economic Development Committee meetings have been videoed?
We started audio recording in, I believe, May or June of this year.
Audio recording. I thought you said that all of the committees were videotaped.
Started this
Commission.
year.
That's starting now.
Only commissions are videotaped,
Right.
committees.
Audio recorded for
Committees
Okay,
audio.
committees are audio, okay, but it just started.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry. I think the idea, I understood the idea, and this council is the one who supported very strongly in the beginning the idea of the Economic Development Committee. I believe that that was the council at that time, and I might be mistaken, recognizing that since we didn't have economic development staff, which pretty much every other city does, either at least part-time, if not full-time staff, that we needed a body at least to try to do some of that work. And I believe if we had staff to do that work, they would be doing more of the things of the sort that I said, which would be, of course, supporting the local businesses, but also being proactive, reaching out to developers, considering incentives, considering policy, considering specific plans for San Pablo Avenue, that sort of thing. And that's where I think we still have a gap in this city. And we could do a lot more. And I see a lot of stuff happening in El Cerrito, and they now do have at least a half-time staff person, economic development staff person. Leave it there for now.
So what kind of direction do you need on this? Since you've got nothing so far.
I had a suggestion. I'm not hearing, am I hearing any support from the council on that? For my working with staff on coming up with some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what your ideas are, but
they're along the same lines as what I've just been saying. Is I think Albany should work towards the development of at least a half-time staff position for this, but in lieu of that, to get the Economic Development Committee working on these sorts of things. Reaching out to developers, coming up with specific ideas about what are the parcels that could be best redeveloped, and for what purposes, what businesses do we want to reach out to? That happens in other cities. They say we don't have enough restaurants. That's not the case in Albany, but we don't have enough restaurants. We want to attract some restaurants, so let's make the climate good for opening restaurants. We want a big box store, say you wanted that. And so you look at the parcels in town and figure out where you could possibly put a big box store as a totally made up example. That's the sort of thing I think an Economic Development Committee could be doing great things. Those are the sorts of things that could be doing great things for our city.
That seems to me more like a strategic plan issue.
Right. And we have that. We just did an economic strategic plan.
Some of those things are in the strategic plan. It's the implementation that we have none of. No staff.
We do have implementation, and it's coming to the council in 2019. It is with a number of different staff because it's really based on the discipline of that particular staff, whether it's a planner or whether it's more of a community development generalist. Yes, in terms of full speed implementation, no, we don't have a full-time person, and that's because we don't have the funding for it. We can certainly look at that in the future. What I might suggest is this is our newest committee. It was developed in 2015. This is their end of their first term. So as the council looks to appointments, we can keep the purpose as is for now and really look towards the work plan to help focus the group on some deliverables and tangibles. As you know, the work plans are developed by the committee, but they are reviewed by the council. And as that work plan process comes through the council, I think everyone would benefit from some really strong review of all things that are being proposed. Because as you know, a year later, everybody looks at the work plan and says, what did we really mean? What are we supposed to do? And so as this process comes through the council, maybe that's a way that we can work through some of the things that Councilmember Pilch has mentioned in terms of priorities and focus areas for the committee, given that they're still new.
But the fundamental idea that the city should invest more resources into attracting new businesses is something that that to me at least seems like a council strategic plan issue.
And we'll have the opportunity in January to talk about that.
Yeah.
So, and is it the sense of the council we're going to leave this exactly as it is, or do we want to try at least tweaking it somewhat?
I'd like to get input from the committee on this one. It seems to make sense.
Okay, so let's leave it
agree.
now as is.
So just to be clear, we're not going to, for now, we're not going to implement the staff changes, staff suggestions.
That seems to me to be the sense of the council.
Okay. Just being clear about that. Thank you.
Okay, and that brings us to social and economic justice. Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. This seems to be the hottest issue of the evening. I basically agree with most of the comments that I heard from the audience tonight. I think this commission is, I don't know if it's unique to Albany, but it is one of the great things about Albany. I don't have a problem with having a Human Services Commission, but I think that might be something in addition to the Social Economic Justice Commission. They do have a broad mandate, but I think there's been a lot of interesting ideas that have spun off of it. So, that said, whether they could stay, more focused from time to time. I mean, I guess sometimes you can have, too many things that you're out trying to do, and maybe you're not as effective. But at this point, I wouldn't make a big change, and I think going from social economic justice to human services, I think Brian's comment about sounding going to sort of a bureaucracy rather than a more active group rings true.
Other comments?
Sure. So I think that in general we have the right controls over the bodies by having control over the work plan. So if we were to choose to keep social and economic justice, we could choose to have them work on human services issues only if that made sense. So I don't think we have to narrow the scope of the body. I think we can, on a case-by-case basis, we have the control over what they work on. I do think that both social justice and economic justice are still huge issues in our time, and that we need to mark the importance of those by keeping those terms in the name of the commission. So I think with us having control over the work plan, with there being training for the commissions or the committee, I wouldn't recommend any changes at this time, except if we want to add human services to the list, that's fine too.
Michelle?
Yeah, on this issue of a bureaucracy versus a more activist organization, it brings to mind what happened with the homeless task force, which is that, these bodies are advisory to the council, and they are bound by the Brown Act. But because we're such a tiny town, we don't necessarily have the kind of outside advocacy groups other than Albany Strollers and Rollers. So, we don't have a tenants union. And when we took up the idea of rent review and just cause eviction and so forth, the key people who felt strongly about advancing tenant protections were the members of the Social and Economic Justice Commission, and they couldn't really come together and work to further their objectives because they were an advisory body. It would be a violation of the Brown Act for them to get together and, you know, and try to advance that. So there are, and it was good, I thought, that when the homeless task force people, you know, it was disbanded, they actually gained strength because they started working through the diverse housing working group and were actually more effective that way than they had been as an advisory body. And I think that we should take that into account when we're looking at work programs. Although I don't think it needs to be worked into the charge of the committee, it's something that well, and yeah, it took the soda tax, the same thing came up, although now we're clearer that we can work on campaigns without violating the Brown Act. So my inclination would be to keep the name as it is, but look at the, do it through the work plans to encourage a lot of focus on the human services and aging in place side of it. And do the others, you know, if we get another round of tenant protection issues or other things that might come up under a social and economic justice rubric, that we take those on a case-by-case kind of basis.
Michael, do you have a thought that you want to share? I guess my bigger it's not even a concern, I guess it's a question about, maybe I don't know what human services means, but it seems to me that this is under the Human Services Department now. And I'm not sure what social and economic justice does that isn't a human service, whether it's housing or whether it's homeless services or whether it's senior services. To me, those all come under the umbrella of human services. They're services to humans. You know, I don't really care, I guess, one way or the other about the name, but I guess I think of human services as being all of these things, and so it's kind of confusing to me that people are so opposed to that phrase, but because that is the focus of this commission. It's providing service to our community.
Well, there are things like tenant protections. If somebody came in wanting a new set of tenant protections, I don't think that would necessarily fall into what we think of as human services. It's a regulatory and code.
See, I think of that as human services.
You think of that as human services.
Because it's part of housing.
Yeah.
And I think of housing as being part of human services. And some of this is just kind of language, and that's fine.
Our chair of our SEJC would like to comment.
Kathy, you may comment, but come up to the thing. I'm breaking every rule.
Well, from my life experience, when I think of human services, I'm thinking of like social services where you apply for food stamps or you apply for Section 8. Social and economic justice, that's talking about people's rights. And it's more about, do you have the right to housing? Do you have the right to be able to feed yourself and your family? So we're thinking more about, like you say, advocacy. You need advocacy to push things towards having the service be provided. And I believe that's what we did with the rent review. We pushed the issue so that the service, the mediation service, would be provided to persons who felt like their rent was less than they could sustain.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification. And I think, you know, the only other piece on this that, and we've obviously talked about this, is having on every staff report that we have the sustainability, the financial impact, and having the social and economic justice impact as part of staff reports. Sometimes there is one, sometimes there isn't, but I think it's important to always have that as sort of part of the city focus. Okay. So with that, it's the sense of the council that's going to stay basically the same, and it'll be the work plan that kind of focuses the group on what they're going to focus on the next 2 years. Is that our sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, sustainability. Any thoughts?
I like this very much. I think having it be a technical advisory committee makes a great deal of sense and is badly needed, I think.
Any other comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think this it seems a little clunky, climate action plan, technical advisory committee, but it essentially is a little more to the point of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And sustainability, while, I like the concept of sustainability, it's so broad, perhaps we do need something that's specific to actually their workload.
And I believe that that committee was formed before we had a cap. So, they were they became, once the cap was formed, then that was their focus, and it makes sense for that to be their focus, because that's where all their stuff would happen anyway, I think.
So we'll leave that. Okay, moving on to traffic and safety. Thoughts, comments?
I'll put on a funny hat here, and Amy Smullins can police me, but I attended the Albany Strollers and Rollers meeting that was held in November, and since nobody who was there is going to speak, I thought I'd raise that there was a great deal of enthusiasm, and I think a consensus there, that the word mobility is the word that they would like to see used in connection with the name of this committee. So something like mobility. I won't go into safety, but just the mobility committee was of interest to that group.
I don't particularly like that name. I have no idea what that means.
It seems a little odd to me. I don't know.
I think that, well, it seems like it's...
I like it too. I like it because it kind of, to me, much more when you say bicycle and pedestrian, to me that does seem like it's not talking about these other modes, even though, I hear what Amy was saying about that.
Although
mobility includes everything.
Yeah, it includes so much. If you have an ankle sprain and can't get around, and you go to your physician, they might ask you about your mobility on your ankle.
Can you touch your toes? Yeah.
Can you touch your toes? I mean,
I don't know. I think it's well taken, because traffic obviously you don't talk about the traffic on the sidewalk with the pedestrians, right? And transportation, it's not necessarily, you'd associate that with pedestrians either. I really like mobility, but I'm not getting a sense that we're going to get a consensus on that.
What about transportation safety? Because the safety goes with the transportation. The safety doesn't go with other forms of safety in the community. As Brian said earlier, it's not your house getting broken into. So the safety goes with the transportation.
But it isn't just safety.
Yes.
There's a lot of other aspects.
Right, but that's a piece of it.
It is a piece of it.
Well, transportation and safety, or transportation safety?
I think, it has to be safe transportation, and all transportation has to be safe, whether you're driving or walking or biking or farting or whatever, it has to be safe. So.
Safe transportation.
It's so much more, though, than safety. It's convenience. It's, there's headways of buses, the capacities of bike paths. There's just, to me, it just seems like it's so much broader than that.
Yeah, I might, I'll go out on a limb here and say I don't necessarily think it would be terrible to lose the safety in the title. as long as safety doesn't get lost in the mission. And I can't see it getting lost in the mission. I mean, that should be front and center in the mission statement, that it's about the safety of all people traveling around, all modes of transit. And so I think the rest, it might be just a little bit of, might be some words, not quite as important as making sure we know the mission is safety. Is a big part of the mission.
I don't think I did a very good job of pitching the word mobility, and I'd like to give the.
You did a good job. It's just, I don't know.
Come on, guys.
Tough counsel tonight.
Mobility.
But I'd like to give them an opportunity to, some of the committee members maybe to weigh in on that. Go ahead.
I wrote down that I didn't like transportation as a standalone because that does sound very vehicular to me, whether it is meant to or not. Transportation sounds like it has wheels and not wheelchair wheels.
Agree.
Mobility to me, and maybe it's just my experience, to me it's tied with disabilities. Mobility is wheelchairs and walkers and sprained ankles or whatever.
How about Transportation and Mobility Commission?
Well, but the mobility should be part of the transportation. What did Alameda County Transportation, transportation is kind of the generic word, right? Because it's Alameda County Transportation Commission, and we deal with all kinds of things.
Sometimes it feels like transportation commissions are taking over the world.
And I guess maybe that's why, in a way, I liked the safety piece in there, because it kind of softens it. It makes the transportation safe for everybody, which to me makes you kind of think about, okay, not just the car, but the bicycle has to have a safe place and the pedestrian has to have a safe place. So it kind of...
So you're saying transportation safety still is appealing to you? I can go with that.
It's not my favorite, but I'm not liking anything else better.
I can go with that.
Transportation and safety. Right, with the ampersand,
No, she
or
didn't want the and.
She wants transportation safety. I don't like that.
Well, I mean, I could
Yeah.
live with the and. It just seems to me once you get into and, you've got transportation and safety. To me, they should be melded together. It should be, the transportation is what's safe. Got any thoughts?
Yeah, transportation and safety does sound like it kind of limits it in a way that you're looking at one aspect of transportation, and as Councilmember Nason points out, it's a little broader. I mean, safety is obviously perhaps the most important factor of it, but it's also some other things. I mean, I'd have no problem with Transportation and Safety Commission. I mean, and I don't see that as somehow implying that they're separate
How about
concepts.
How about safe transportation? Did I take?
To me, that's the same. But
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Another thought, kind of reflecting our sort of mission statement. How about the Diverse Transportation Commission?
Working group?
May I?
Please.
The
Finally.
Transportation Commission really adds an air of professionalism. And as Councilmember Pilch noted, you can certainly have all the definitions and groupings of safety and all the other responsibilities and obligations of that commission within the ordinance language. It can be very well spelled out so that their charge and what they're responsible for is well developed.
So just Transportation Commission.
I think it works the best.
Yeah.
I can support that. We just have to update in the changes in the staff report. That's not reflected in what the staff is currently before us proposing, but that can easily
Sure.
be added.
Yeah, and you would definitely receive this ordinance. It would be an ordinance, so you get a first and second reading, an opportunity to make any tweaks that you would like to see. So as this moves forward, it will certainly come back to you for any editorials that you'd like.
So as part of what we'll receive, will it include having the active transport, the ATAC as part of that? It will be part of the ordinance?
Right. Now, the other option that we have as in developing an ordinance is that changes can be made by resolution. So we'll look at some of that in case there are some moving parts or some things that aren't permanent in nature. Again, as I wrap up, I'll give you some next steps in terms of timetables, because some of these are on different timetables.
Right. I guess I'm a little bit concerned, and if there is still flexibility, that's good. You know, as people change and interests change and everything, I want to be sure we don't lock something in forever that maybe we'll find that it's not as appropriate as we thought, which isn't to say we get rid of that body, it's just to make it even maybe a stronger body standing independently. Okay, so.
I had one last comment, not about the safety part, but just I did want to highlight about the BPAC, about the commission being also the BPAC.
Wait, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee is mandated by the MTC. If we don't have that, then we're not eligible for.
Right, okay, I was calling it the ACTAC, but you're right.
Yeah, and so I think that is important to note. Although certainly, I don't know what our legal mind would say about saying that anyone who's picked up a bicycle could be a bicyclist, or anyone who's set foot on the ground could be a pedestrian. I think we'd run afoul of the intentions of MTC if we didn't have people who used pedestrians who did significant, where pedestrian was a significant mode for them, and bicyclists for whom bicycling was a significant mode for them. I think we could possibly run into trouble if we have the BPAC as the Transportation Commission, and it's not composed of some members who have those significant modes. Just a caution.
I thought we put that one to bed, but one possibility might be that the BPAC is a subcommittee of transportation. If somebody wanted to, and also if we're assuming that pedestrians includes wheelchair riders and it includes people who ride buses, they're both pedestrians. Then if somebody on the council decided they wanted to put someone on the Transportation Commission who was just passionate about fixing our terrible streets and getting upgrading our PCI, and that was their focus, and they admit that they don't like to walk and they don't know how to ride a bike, just that we don't. If we're going to say that this is a committee of bicyclists, to me at least, it suggests that we're going to lose a certain balance that we have to have.
Of course, no one's saying it should be a commission of bicyclists, but I just, what is, Jeff, is it a required size of the BPAC? Is it required to be specific size?
I can read to you an excerpt from the MTC resolution. It says, each county and city is required to have a bicycle advisory committee. They didn't have the word pedestrian in, but I think we added that in. Just bear with me for a second. To review and prioritize TDA Article 3 bicycle and pedestrian projects, and to participate in the development and review of comprehensive bicycle plans. BAC should be composed of both bicyclists and pedestrians. A city BAC shall be composed of at least 3 members who live or work in the city. More members may be added as desired. They will be appointed by the city council. The city or town manager will designate staff to provide administrative and technical support to the committee.
Yeah, so it couldn't be a subcommittee. It needs to be 3.
But there's 5 on the committee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
the other 2 could be anybody.
Yeah, right.
Because I know we've certainly had commissioners on there that, well, they don't really fit that mold.
Yeah, I don't want to beat this to death, but just the danger of losing the funding is there. That's all. if we don't do it right. I think we're okay.
And we could always pull it out of traffic and safety and have it a standalone.
Yes, absolutely.
So I guess I think maybe I'm thinking that you're thinking the same thing I am. You don't want to exclude somebody from being on the commission because they're not a bicycle rider or a, big-time walker. That's not how this commission should be totally working. But that's not the way the law seems to read. So I don't think spirit counts. Okay,
Well,
but
even aside from spirit, you could have a dissident. I think we should have room for a dissident.
so
just a thought.
We're sort of okay with this for now. Okay.
In terms of follow-up, we have two different timetables here, things that need to happen immediately and things that are going to take a little bit more time. Based on your direction tonight, we will return to you at your next meeting, December 17th, with a resolution regarding the clarification of the meeting timing for the Charter Review Committee in terms of when they start meeting, as well as to clarify and update the charge of the Sustainability Committee. Those are the two items that you'll receive on December 17th. The other item is specific to, what did you settle on? The Transportation Commission. That one will take a little bit more time as it is an ordinance and it doesn't directly impact your reappointment process. So we'll get that to you in the near future.
There hasn't been any mention in this discussion of the finance, the budget and finance committee.
Right.
I assume that is something we would go back to after we're caught up on our CAFRs, or
Yes.
is that? Okay.
Yes, that's first thing we are waiting for is the certification of the election results, as that affected both the Office of the City Treasurer as well as establishment of that Finance Advisory Committee. So as we transition through that whole process, that will be coming back to the council to establish that group. It'll probably be a midterm, if you will, establishment of that group, but we'll look to do that in the next several months.
Okay.
And the other thing I think that we requested was that we have a discussion with the school district on their appointees.
I don't, and this might simply be a legal question, or it might be a question of neatness. I don't know what you'd call it, but the charters of these commissions come from all over the place. There's one from the charter. I think there's just one from the charter, and the rest are either from resolutions or meeting minutes. There's not, doesn't seem to be one formal way in which these are set down. So is it staff's intention to do it in a particular way going forward, always with an ordinance or always in code, or?
The preference is by a resolution because we have more flexibility. As you can see with an ordinance, it takes a little bit longer and it's codified, and that's an extra cost to the city, to be quite frank, in terms of putting that through the codification process. And that really only applies to those with a certain level of authority, and I think that we're pretty settled with those groups as they stand. It's Park and Rec, Planning and Zoning, and Traffic and Safety, the Transportation Commission as that evolves.
Yeah, it just seems like it's easy. It's just for bookkeeping purposes. If it was all resolutions, then we'd be able to find them more easily than just from meeting minutes where they could more easily get lost.
Yeah, and in recent history, they all have been resolutions.
I have one more thing. It's Parks and Rec. Did we do? I don't know. I missed it. I was thinking about Susan Schwartz's comments, and that perhaps Parks and Rec should be something along the lines of parks, recreation, and natural areas, because the creeks are not parks. They are shared spaces with our adjoining cities. They have a lot of special characteristics, and they don't really fit under any other committee's charge. And if they were part of the charge of Parks and Rec, maybe they would get more consistent attention. Similarly with the bulb, even though it's technically the Albany Waterfront Park, there's a sign there that says Albany Waterfront Park. It doesn't, I don't think that people on Parks and Rec necessarily think of it as part of what they do. And I'd like to see them start doing so.
So to make sure I'm clear, it would include creeks as well as the waterfront park, Albany's waterfront park.
Recreation and natural
areas to include creeks and the waterfront park.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a general direction from the council?
Are others okay with that? Good.
You lost Michael. Okay, is there anything else on the word? Nicole, you're okay with all that? Okay. Other business announcement of future agenda items. The next city council meeting will be a special meeting on Monday, December 10th at 6 o'clock. We have an hour because we have the Arts Committee coming in at 7. And we are adjourning our meeting tonight in memory of two people. Sarah Zimmerman, an Albany resident since 1993. She was an architect and part of Terrace Park Dog Owners. And also, of course, President George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States. And with that, we are adjourned.